Good morning. Thank you very much for joining us today. I'll call the Joint Subcommittee on K-12 Higher Ed and CIP to order, and will the committee secretary please call the roll?
Assemblywoman Howdy.
Here.
Assemblywoman Kasama.
Here.
Assemblyman Miller.
Present.
Assemblywoman Monroe Moreno.
Here.
Assemblyman O'Neill.
Here.
Assemblywoman Peters.
Here.
Assemblyman Yeager.
Here.
Senator Canizaro. Senator Neal.
Here.
Senator Severs Gansert.
Here.
Senator Titus.
Here.
Assemblywoman Backus.
Present.
And Chair Dondero Loop.
Thank you very much, and please mark any members not currently in the room present as they arrive. Before we begin today's budget hearing, I would like to go over a few housekeeping items. First, in order to limit disruptions, just like any good classroom, please turn off your devices. Also, for those of you who will be presenting today, please remember to state your name and spell it for the record each time you speak. And if you have a business card, please hand that off to our committee secretary. That helps. And lastly, we will have a public comment period at the end of today's meeting. We have quite a lengthy budget process, and so hang on. I expect that we'll all be very respectful to each other and to our presenters in the room. So with that, we have one agency on the, actually, two agencies on the agenda today. And so we'll be hearing from the Nevada System of Higher Ed, and they'll be presenting a total of 30 budgets. And we will also hear from WICHE, which we will start with. So with that, we'll need to be efficient with our time, and so I will ask WICHE and team, please join us at the table, and we'll start with you.
Madam Chair, members of the committee, for the record, I'm Dale Urquiaga, and I'm here presently in my role as a commissioner of the Western Interstate Compact for Higher Education.
And Mr. Urquiaga, could I interrupt you just for a minute so that the committee knows that this is page 25 in our packet at the end, but it was at the front of our agenda, so that's why that happened. Thank you very much, and I'm sorry for the interruption. Please go ahead.
Can you advance to that slide? Thank you, Madam Chair. Dale Urquiaga, again, for the record. So for those that may not understand, WICHE is a regional compact of the Western states, and some of you are members, and as am I, a commissioner. There are 3 commissioners appointed by the governor, and to my right is Patty Porter, who serves as the director of the WICHE program. WICHE is administratively housed within the Chancellor's office, but does not report to the Board of Regents. And so she's part of this presentation today. So I think I'll just turn the time to her so she can explain the various programs within her agency.
So for the record, my name is Patty Porter. I'm the director of the Nevada office of WICHE. Thank you for allowing me to meet you and talk to you. Just to go through, as the acting chancellor mentioned, the origin of WICHE started in '59 with a 3-member commission representing the state and also on the regional WICHE commission. The Nevada office of WICHE operates 2 programs. One is called the Professional Student Exchange Program, or PSEP, and the other is the Health Professional Education Program, or known as HPEP. These programs provide tuitional assistance to Nevada residents studying various allied health professions in exchange for employment commitments upon graduation. For the requested budget, governor's budget, PSEP slots, so for the PSEP slots, which is works in conjunction with regional WICHE when we select these students, 38 slots for FY24 and 36 slots for FY25. These slots fund occupational therapy, physical therapy, physician assistant, veterinary medicine, and pharmacy. And then for HPEP, there are 49 slots for each for FY24 and 49 for FY25. And these will be funding the Master of Social Work, Advanced Practice Nursing, APRN Geriatric, and Bachelor's of Science Nursing. And then lastly, a transfer to the Division of Public and Behavioral Health to fund 3 psychological PhD interns each for FY24 and 25. I did want to bring, for the brevity of time to share with you some data. To let you know what the graduation rates were of our participants. So if you look on the slide for FY28, you can see that for 46 slots, for example, we had for PSAP, we had 44 graduate, and then for HPEP, 5, and then 5 graduate, and then so forth. I don't want to go into detail because I know you need a lot of time, but just to note that PSAP students normally are full-time students, and HPEP students are usually graduate students have full-time jobs that are going part-time. So overall, as you can look at and also the program lengths vary from 2 to 4 years. So for example, PA, a physician assistant program is 2 years, whereas veterinary medicine is 4 years. So they vary. So I think I'll stop at that point for time purposes, and if you have any questions, thank you.
Thank you so much for that information. And I will go to Assemblywoman Bacchus for the first question.
Thank you so much for your presentation. Please explain what efforts are taken by WICHE to market its programs and solicit applications to ensure that participant slots are filled each year.
Okay, thank you very much for that question. And sorry, I can't see your nameplate behind, so I know I'm supposed to state your name, I believe. So for the record, my name is Director Porter, and to answer your question, so the marketing efforts that we undertake is, and in fact, I started as director last May 1st, and so for my efforts is to reach out to of all the programs I mentioned, I'm going to use an example like for nursing. I reached out to the University of Nevada, Reno School of Nursing. I contacted the deans in those offices to let them know about our program. They are familiar with the program, but to let them know, for example, that the availability of the slots, about the program, the qualifications, and then giving them information so they can get out to their students so they can respond to our application to apply for the program. So a lot of it is reaching out to UNR, UNLV, reaching out to contacts to get the information out to students, and then responding back to those questions. Also, my goal is probably in April, as I get past this budget hearing, to go out. I would like to visit the campuses and visit with their. So it's not just a phone conversation. I believe face-to-face is very important, and also allow, if students want to meet with me, set up some informational meetings and so forth. So I hope that answers your question.
Thank you very much. And would you tell me what data is used by WICHE to determine the need for additional veterinarian medicine professionals in Nevada?
So the information that I used this year was information that I gathered from the Las Vegas Global Alliance. They had come out with a report that was the most up-to-date regarding, I think it was done in last year, and it was published, and it was in cooperation with Dieter and also with the governor's office. I don't know, I'm doing this off the top of my head, but Goen, I believe, or to work on those numbers for, even though it was Southern Nevada, veterinarians were ranked number 3 on that list as far as high need. Also, I utilize data from the federal government, which does classify areas of Nevada which are where there's high need for veterinarians in the area, which probably, as you probably guess, is a lot is rural. But there has been a growth in also the urban areas as well.
Thank you very much. Questions? Assemblywoman Kasama.
Thank you so much, Chair. Thank you for the overview. When they've graduated, where do they end up? Are they required to stay in the state of Nevada? Are they going to those other regional states? How does that work?
Thank you, Assemblywoman Kasama. Director Porter for the record. So when they graduate, our students are required, for every year they receive a stipend, they have to do 1 year of service full-time in Nevada. And that's part of my responsibilities, not just to certify they're eligible, but also to make sure that they're graduating and they're carrying out their commitments. So for example, I gave the example of a physician assistant, so that they get 2 years full-time funding, then they have to do 2 years of service in Nevada. And for example, for nursing, for example, nurse practitioner, if they take full-time funding for two years, let's say, then they owe 2 years of full-time service in a medically underserved area in Nevada, which is determined by a HRSA. It's a federal fields that they determine what are the medically underserved areas of Nevada. So that's usually the requirement when they graduate. And then when they complete, it's my job to make sure that they certify that they're documenting their hours. And then when they fulfill that requirement, then I let them know that that requirement is fulfilled, and then they're complete.
Follow-up, Chair? Do you know from, let's say, the last couple of years, once they fulfilled their 2 years, do you know how many have remained in Nevada or how many have gone to other states?
So for completing their requirement, most of our students do. Now, whether they stay after the 2 or the 3 or the 4 years of however the amount of funding, I think my numbers were showing somewhere around, like, as of today, just doing, like, if I just said as of today, going back to FY18, I had about 80 that I could roughly count to, and that's to my satisfaction where I actually can find, because there were more probably students that had licenses, for example, active licenses, like in nursing, but I could not find them as far as practicing. And so part of my duty is also to follow up with these practice questionnaires, to follow up with them and make sure and find out where they are and where they're located.
Yeah, it'd be nice to track that for the
Yeah,
history.
so we are tracking it. I mean, I think further longitudinal, like past the time of their obligation, that gets a little more complicated and tough, but still, I like to do that. Yes, I agree.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. I know many that are still here that have done WICHE, so thank you. Any additional questions? Senator Titus.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm one of the members on the WICHE Advisory, and I think the chair is also the WICHE Advisory Committee, so proud to be a part of that. I've witnessed what the advantages are for Nevada students to have WICHE, especially when I started medical school. We had students from other states that we helped, and likewise in the veterinary program. So I'm pleased to see that you've recognize the need for the veterinarian program. I know that it kind of fell on the wayside as maybe we had enough veterinarians in Nevada, but we certainly didn't have enough large animal veterinarians in the rural areas. So thank you for, every year it changes. You have to keep up on where our needs are. So thank you for that. My concern, however, is that we have the availability to have more students in this program and not quite filling it yet. And I know that we had 60 slots, and I know there's been questions about how are you reaching out. And so, I just want to make sure that we do have every effort. We should have our full capacity of nurses, especially the psychiatric behavioral health nurses, and wondering if it's good enough just to go to the graduate programs, and if there's something else that you could reach out to these Nevada students, whether it's through the university system. I'm not sure, but interested to see what other plans you have to make sure you fill these programs, because I think we're losing some of the students, and also knowing that they do come back to Nevada, and this new generation, I see they move all over the place anyway. If they stay at a job for more than a year, you're shocked. The fact that they do come back, they're held accountable, at least they stay for that obligation is a good thing. But I'd love to see some other ideas on making sure you reach out and make sure these programs are available.
So, Senator Titus, thank you for that comment and that recognition. So one of the programs that we're starting different this year is we are also allowing some slots for Bachelor's of Science BSN nursing programs, and I call it the BSN to APRN pipeline program. So as much as we're funding also APRNs, we want to also encourage those students who are getting their BSNs to think about going on. Obviously, they need a little time in the field, but to go on and actually get their APRN and think about those postgraduate programs like geriatric training as an example. So that's part of growing that pipeline and doing that. And I think also one of my commissioners wants to say something.
Thank you, Madam Chair. For the record, Dale Urquiaga. Senator, I would say that I think part of the wisdom of this body moving WICHE into INSHE is exactly the point to which you're speaking. It makes it more possible for the director to access our programs because she is integrated from an administrative standpoint with the Office of Student Academic Affairs. So much more closely aligned. Those of you who have heard me speak already a couple times this session know that my view is we don't have a very coherent system when we look at these workforce development programs. And so I have already seen bills being moved in this legislature, and as I try to take a position for my board on those bills in my role as acting chancellor, I try to ask, where's the nexus? Is there a nexus with WICHE? As we create these new programs, who has the oversight to ensure that we are actually filling the needs. And so I think that this body's wisdom was putting it in INSHE. It is up to us to ensure that we get better at that.
Great, thank you. Thank you for that. Thank you, Madam Chair, for the questions.
Thank you, and we'll go to the last question from Senator Neal, and then we'll go on to the next agenda item.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm just super curious, what is your outreach budget?
Thank you, Senator Neal, for that question. I don't really have one. I mean, I have an operations account, and usually to me, my travel money is really my outreach account. So I have put money aside where I want to fly to, like, in Southern Nevada, and I want to make a point to visit the institutions. My background prior to being hired here was actually, I was the Director of Outreach and Recruitment, Program Director at TMCC. So this is something that I love, and I enjoy reaching out to students and talking to them and presenting in all facets, whether it's social media, Zoom, or just in person. I believe you have to do it all. So yeah, I would say that it's my travel budget. It's small, but it can work.
Thank you for that.
Thank you very much. And with that, we'll ask the Chancellor to go ahead and start part 2.
Thank you, Madam Chair. If I may, for the record, Dale Urquiaga, before we leave WICHE, I neglected to introduce the chair of the Nevada WICHE Commission, Dr. Fred Lawkin, is, I think, to my left and behind me. And we're also very privileged to have here the president of Regional WICHE, Demi Michelau, is with us today. So I apologize for not previously introducing them.
That's all right. And welcome to all of you. And while Chancellor and Mr. Klinger are getting ready, I will also welcome all of the presidents of our state institutions. Thank you so much for being here. And we'll look forward to all this great information. So Chancellor, when you're ready, please go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. For the record, Dale Urquiaga, and I have the privilege of serving as acting chancellor of the Nevada System of Higher Education. It's a pleasure to be with you today. I wore my Mardi Gras tie. It is Mardi Gras. I am a Roman Catholic. And if you are familiar with Mardi Gras traditions, you know that they make a king's cake and you hide a coffee bean in that cake and the person who gets it wins a prize. So Mr. Klinger has hidden something in his slides, and the one of you who finds that will be pleased to know that Mr. Klinger will complete his presentation in pantomime in honor of the French behind Mardi Gras. So be on the lookout, folks, as we go through our presentation. Madam Chair told me that we would be able to sort of make this up as we go along today. I recognize we have 30 budget accounts in front of you. We are going to try to present them holistically. And as I do so, I want to begin by introducing Chairman Byron Brooks from the Board of Regents and Regent Heather Brown from the Board of Regents, who are not just my bosses, they are your constitutionally elected Board of Regents, 2 of the 13 who govern our system. So the system, as the Chair indicated, is comprised of 8 institutions, plus the system office or the chancellor's office. All 8 of our presidents are here today, and so I am very honored that they are here. I am also very relieved as we go through our budget presentation. Feel free to call the presidents forward to ask questions about their particular institutions. They are the experts. Certainly, I am not. Mr. Klinger is as well, but in order to allow Mr. Klinger to breathe once in a while, feel free to call upon our presidents. They have traveled to be with you here today, and this is an important budget for them. The system operates under the vision statement you can see on the slide. Today, we are one system. We have been so since 1955, but we comprise a world of opportunities, everything from certificates in a workforce development program through very complicated research, which yields results to the people of Nevada and really throughout the globe. Go ahead, Andrew. As I've mentioned, the system is governed by a Board of Regents and has 8 institutional presidents. We have, you can go ahead, Andrew. As you all know, I think 2 research universities. The oldest institution in our system, the University of Nevada, Reno, dates from 1874. The University of Nevada, Las Vegas, which is now the largest institution in our system, dates from the 1950s, and its name was changed to UNLV in the late 1960s when the system came into being. For those of you who have heard my presentation 3 or 4 times now, I apologize. I'll try to spice it up with something new as I go through these slides. I think at least 3 of the senators have heard me talk about this already. Go ahead, Andrew. Nevada has a 3-tiered system of universities and colleges and community colleges. Nevada State College was created by this body just 20 years ago and is now the fastest growing institution in our system. Housed in Henderson, it was originally started as a teaching college for teachers and nurses, and has expanded to be a full-service state college. And as I say, is really our fastest growing and one of our more diverse campuses. We have 4 community colleges in the system. I think you all know that. The first community college today, called Great Basin College, was originally called Elko Community College and dates from the early 1960s. It's about the same age as me. And the other colleges were added in the early 70s. Roughly, they just celebrated their 50th anniversary. And those institutions serve in the 2-year space. Some also offer 4-year degrees. They also are our primary workforce engine for certificates, and have a close relationship, as you have heard in the WICHE presentation, with the Governor's Office of Workforce Innovation, with DETR and with GoEd. We have one research institute within the system, and that is the Desert Research Institute. It's also one of the oldest institutions. It was originally housed within UNR, was removed to be a separate entity again in the early 1960s. And today is known throughout the world. I have visited DRI programs in China, and they are spread throughout the globe. They are recognized in environmental sciences generally, and we have more than 100 PhDs in that program. Students also benefit from that. And I wish to say to this committee, one thing about the research component, whether that's when you think of DRI or you think of our research universities, remember that the faculty members and the scientists who participate in that research are also in our programs. And so students who attend our institutions have the benefit of education or side-by-side graduate teaching assistants with some of the brightest minds in the world. So sometimes I am asked, why do we do all this research? Shouldn't you people just be providing certificates and degrees so people can get a job? We are a ladder of opportunity in this system, and that one rung of that ladder is the fact that our students are exposed to the research, and then of course the research comes home, whether that is through public health or the environmental sciences. Those things benefit Nevadans directly just as much as a pharmacy tech or an HVAC certificate from a community college benefits Nevadans who are seeking employment. I will not belabor you with this slide. It is the mission of INCHE. I'll let you read it at your leisure. I will spend a little bit of time here. Since about 2017, 2018, the system has operated with goals around access, success, performance gaps, sometimes called achievement gaps, workforce needs, and research. Just last fall, the Board of Regents, I think, wisely added another goal about collaboration, accountability, and transparency. I refer to this, the made-up word of the day, is systeminess. The things that I and CFO Klinger are responsible for at the Chancellor's office is ensuring that across the institutions we have collaboration, so that your monies that you appropriate to us are wisely spent, that we are accountable to you, whether that is in the number of awards conferred or in how we spend your monies, and that we are transparent to our students, to the taxpaying public, and to this body, and to our employees about how we operate. This year, we also adopted 2 performance imperatives. This gives me some watch words for the time that I serve as your acting chancellor, and I think the board wisely chose 2 important topics. One is the broad issue of equity. Some of you have asked me in previous hearings about the growth of our staff. How representative are we? There are between 13,000 and 15,000 of us on any given day spread across the system. How representative are we of the students we serve? The student body today of our institutions is far more diverse than it was when I attended one of these institutions 40 years ago. And our staff, while we have made progress, we know we can continue to make progress in this arena. And so I think wisely we have set this as an imperative for the year. And then second, of course, we never go anywhere that we don't talk about money. And so like all agencies who come before this body, we are interested in teeing up a genuine conversation about adequacy and equitable distribution. You will hear me speak more about the funding formula later in the presentation. A quick word about enrollment headcount. The Nevada system of higher education reached its peak in 2010. And since that time, if you will recall, that was the Great Recession. When one doesn't have a job, one often returns to school to find new skills. That's what happened then. Enrollment peaked. As the economy recovered, enrollment dropped a little bit, and we began to recover again, nearly to that peak level in 2019. And then, of course, the pandemic arrived. And the pandemic, walloped our system, if you'll pardon the word, it walloped almost all systems across the country. Student behavior changed. Even though now the economy is running at full steam, folks are still unsure, I think, about whether or not they will return to education as a result of the pandemic and many other issues in our nation. I think people are also questioning value of what we provide. Do I need a 2-year degree or 4-year degree? Is a certificate adequate? And so enrollment this year is just about at 105,000. I think in the spring semester, which we are entering into now, will peak that number. That for us is essentially flat to a little bit down, however. And so one of the things the presidents who are here could tell you they pay closest attention to in my conversations with them is that enrollment number. It is our mission. We are an access institution broadly, and it is our job to find more students, if you have rightly asked about outreach. And right now, with changes in the economy, I think, and changes in the way how folks view education, enrollment continues to be a challenge. You'll hear from Mr. Klinger in a moment about what challenge that poses for us in the funding formula. Not surprisingly, that 65% of our students live in Southern Nevada and attend the 3 educational institutions there, UNLV and CSN, obviously having the lion's share. Employees are distributed across the system similarly. R1 universities employ more folks than the smaller institutions, but every position, whether that individual is an administrator, a PhD faculty member, or a member of the classified service who makes the trains run on time, every employee adds to the student experience. I think this slide is interesting. I've pointed it out in presentations before. So you have an understanding of the distribution of part-time employees, letters of appointment employees. We rely on them heavily, of course, in the community colleges. Those institutions are perhaps more nimble than the large universities. But this slide, I think, over time is also something to watch to understand our system's reliance on part-time and letter of appointment staff. They are, frankly, less expensive than a full-time tenured or position that comes with full benefits. And so while this is great, it offers many Nevadans opportunity and it offers our students a diverse workforce, it is also a bit of a product of our funding and the ways in which we must meet the needs of our students. Awards conferred is typically how we are measured in terms of our success, at least since for the last 2 decades we have focused on the end goal, which is for us graduation. You'll see on this slide, interestingly to me, we've actually dipped down in certificates, which is the primary workforce credential. Those programs are largely or almost entirely self-supporting, meaning they are driven by the fees which they collect. And because of that, sometimes, I have been asked in this committee, sometimes perhaps the price point begins to get out of reach of students. Those programs are not included in the funding formula. And as we talk more about that, and you look at this number, these 2 numbers, and think about what is going on in our workforce and the many needs we have, I think perhaps we ought to think about what is driving that number when we have such needs and workforce. What could we do differently, and therefore what could we ask you to fund differently over these next 2 to 4 years? Graduation rates at our universities, you can see here. We had a good conversation in Senate Education last week about the difference between the 2 institutions that you see here. I've seen some of the data since then, and what I would represent to you is different populations attend these 2 universities. So you can actually see in some of the ACT data of students arriving at UNLV, their level of readiness is not the same as an ACT taker who might matriculate to UNR. And so we have some work to do with our friends in K-12, and we have some work to do as institutions to address the differing needs. You will hear us talk a lot, I think, over this hearing and throughout this session about the differing student types who come to us. When one has an access mission, students who are first gen, students who may have come from poverty, are encouraged and in fact now joining our institutions, they require a differing level of support than a traditional student who has a family more experience, for example, with higher education. I think that's what you see here on this slide. And again, this is on us to provide those services. As I have said in previous committees, those services cost money. They are people. They are not just an idea. Nevada State College has terrific graduation rates, and I've said they are growing by leaps and bounds. So they are, again, they serve a diverse population, one of our more diverse, and so their graduation rates are continuing to move up as they, under the leadership of President Pollard, continue to perfect that work for their student types. And then lastly, the two-year institutions kind of across the board, again, depending on the size of the institution, the community which it serves, and the students who come there. And remember, community colleges, a broad panoply of offerings for final awards, certificates, associate's degrees, and then simply transfer to another institution, preferably one of ours. And so their graduation rates sometimes look different than one might think, well, why aren't they graduating 80%? They have a very different both population mix and award mix. A last slide on my part of the funding, as I think about performance, you see here where the U.S. average is and where Nevada falls. This is not a plea for money. Mr. Klinger will explain to you the percentage of our budgets being restored is, I think, actually quite modest. But I think Nevada has historically underfunded higher education. That can be said of pre-K through 12 education as well. And I know that both those topics are on your minds as they are that of the governor in this session. We remain, as you will hear from Mr. Klinger, largely dependent on state funding. About 2/3 of our general operating monies come from the state, the appropriation which you give us, but that means 1/3 of our general operating monies come from students. So for self-supporting programs and student fees, that's the place to where we turn for additional monies. And so if we think about the state's investment, the lower the state's investment is, the higher the student's investment must be. And so if one is concerned about student fees and student debt, I think we ought pay attention to this slide and see sort of where we fall across our sister states. We've covered WICHE, and so, Madam Chair, I think I have talked quite enough for now. I will turn the time to CFO Klinger, and he will walk you through the budget. I'll talk to a couple of items. I'm happy to answer questions about the system, and of course, the presidents are here as well.
So let's go ahead and hear from Mr. Klinger. I'm still looking for the coffee bean, so let's go ahead and hear from him, and then we'll go to questions. Thank you.
Madam Chair, members of the committee, for the record, Chief Financial Officer Andrew Klinger, and I'll be looking for the coffee bean as well because that came as a surprise to me as well. So first I want to go over just a funding overview, and some of this you heard during our pre-session presentation. So I apologize for some of this being a repeat of that, but wanted to go over just sort of the big picture of the ANSHI budgets. So we have sort of two categories of budgets. We obviously have the state operating budgets, which is what we're talking about today. And then we also have what we call non-state budgets, self-supporting grants and contracts, loans and endowments. And those funds typically stay in those accounts and they balance forward from year to year. Now, obviously, we've talked about the legislative audits that were done, and one of those audits in particular was on the self-supporting accounts, looking at the reserves and the balance forward within those accounts. And so I wanted to give, if we go to the next slide, just the overall funding sources for the system as a whole. So this includes obviously the state appropriations, the grants and contracts. You see at the top line there, $717 million. The state appropriations, and then obviously the tuition and fees. Those are the funds that we collect from the students. So that's not only the registration fees, but that's the differential fees, special course fees. There's different categories of fees that we collect. And then sales and services, gifts, and other. So when you look at our budget in total, including the state budget, it's a little over $2 billion. When you look on the expenditure side, just like most state agencies, 80+% of our budgets are people. So the top line there, employee compensation and benefits, you can see 1.2 million, which makes up a majority of our overall budget. And then as you go down the line, supplies and services, scholarships, depreciation, utilities. And so when you look at total expenditures, again, just a little over $2 billion. So on the state operating side, our teaching institutions are funded using a funding formula. And so I want to talk just here in a few slides just briefly about the funding formula and some of the major components. Now, the funding formula only determines the state portion of the institution's funding. It does not address the student fee portion. So it really is, at the end of the day, it really is a distribution formula. So we come up with a $700 million budget, and the funding formula essentially distributes that funding out to the institutions. The funding formula focuses on outputs, so think course completions. And we derive basically the number of student credit hours that students complete, and then we match that with what we call a discipline matrix. And the discipline matrix assigns weights to certain courses. So an English 101 course, for example, would have a weight of 1, whereas an engineering class may have a weight of 4. And that really is to differentiate between the cost of delivering those courses. And when you combine those outputs, or student credit hours, with the discipline matrix, you end up with what we call the weighted student credit hours. And that really is sort of the heart of the formula. The weighted student credit hours are really where the funding gets distributed to the various institutions. So for weighted student credit hour purposes, we don't count out-of-state students. So weighted student credit hours are only counted on in-state students. We also have many line item budgets as well, such as system administration or system computing, and those do not fall under the funding formula. Those are funded under the more traditional method that you fund other state agencies with base maintenance and enhancement funding. A couple of the other factors that are included in the funding formula, so we have what we call a small institution factor. So we have 2 institutions that fall into this category, Great Basin and WNC. And so the small institution factor are for institutions that have less than 100,000 in weighted student credit hours, and they receive an extra $30 per weighted student credit hours for sort of lack of scale, if you will. There's also a research component to the funding formula. So the 2 research institutions receive an additional 10% weighting on the weighted student, or in the discipline matrix, if you will, on upper division courses and graduate courses. The research institutions also receive funding for research space. So operation O&M costs, they receive additional funding through the formula for specifically for research space. The funding formula also includes what we call a 20% carve out. So once our budget is determined at the end, we essentially carve off 20% of that, and there is again a matrix of metrics, if you will, that the institutions have to meet in order to earn those fundings. We have currently set the targets through years 9 and 10. We have not yet set the targets for years 11 and 12. When we presented our budgets to the Board of Regents in August of last year, we actually had proposing eliminating the performance pool, but have since, in conversations with the governor's office, have since changed that, and so we will be establishing targets for years 11 and 12. Next, just want to talk quickly about registration fees. So you see I've listed here registration fees for all of our institutions for 4 years starting in 23 and going out through 26. Now, our registration fees are tied to what we call a predictable pricing model. and we use the higher education price index. So for example, if you look at that top number on the far right, the 274.75, that number was determined by taking the FY25 number and applying the HEPI index of 2.7%. So you can see there on the slide what the price increases have been since 2024. Now, I should point out the predictable pricing model is only for our basic registration fee as well as non-resident tuition. As I mentioned earlier, we do have other fees such as special course fees or differential fees, and they are not part of the predictable pricing model. And so just so make sure you have a frame of reference there, I'm just talking about one piece of our student fees here when I talk about registration fees. Now I'll go into some of the components of the governor's budget. So first, and this is a slide that you've seen in our pre-session presentation, so a 7.3% increase compared to fiscal 23, and in fiscal 23, I'm including $46.6 million in ARP funds that were awarded to NCHE. But when you compare NCHE, the FY24-25 budget, when you compare it to fiscal year 21, which is essentially a pre-pandemic budget, you can see that for fiscal 24, it's a 4.9% increase in 24 and a 0.9% increase in 25. So now I'm going to walk through some of the funding formula adjustments briefly. So the first component of the funding formula is what we call caseload growth. And so the way we measure caseload growth in the funding formula accounts is we look at our FY 2022 weighted student credit hours. So as I went through those funding formula components, remember that's the student credit hours times the weight applied to the various courses. And so you can see in FY 2022, we had a little over 3 million in weighted student credit hours. When you compare that to 2020, we had 3.1 million, so it's actually a 93,000 weighted student credit hour decrease overall as a system. And so with that, there are institutions such as CSN, GBC, and TMCC that actually lose money under the funding formula, and we'll get to a recommendation that we have included in the governor's budget to resolve that. Some of the other funding formula adjustments, and I talked about some of these components in the previous slide. The research O&M component. In this case, for the two universities, you can see that these are decreases. This is a result of actually the O&M rate declining in one at UNR, and at UNLV there's actually less, slightly less research space. So that's why you see negative numbers there. Traditionally, those have been numbers that have increased over the biennium. Small institution factor, and again, that's for the two institutions who have less than 100,000 in weighted student credit hours. And so for Great Basin, they received an additional 183,000 in funding as a result of that. WNC's number is a negative, and the reason it is a negative is because they actually grew in weighted student credit hours, so they received less of an adjustment than they did in the prior biennia. So there are some that's built in base, so that reduces that number slightly. The next column there is the weighted student credit hour caseload growth that I just talked about. And then finally, that last column there that's titled formula allocation. Because the weighted student credit hours, because the funding is distributed proportionately to the institutions based on their share of the weighted student credit hours, after you run all those other components to the funding formula, what you do at the end is you essentially reweight the institutions based on their share of weighted student credit hours. Because what you can see if you look at that column at the bottom is it essentially nets to zero. So what you're doing is you're just balancing the funding between institutions based on their share of the weighted student credit hours. That last column there is simply a sum of all of the other columns, and as I go forward, I'm going to skip FY25 because it's essentially the same. The numbers are slightly different. I'm going to briefly talk about budget restorations because this will play into the next slide. So we have 2 decision units that are included in just about every budget account, and these are budget restorations from the last biennium. The governor 2 years ago had asked for a 12% increase, or a 12% reduction in budgets. And the legislature included a restoration of positions using ARP funds. So the $37.368 million per year that you see here is the balance of funds that was not restored in the last biennium. And so you can see each institution's share of that. And we talked about this, I think, in the pre-session, but some of the numbers, when you look at the institutions, may not be proportionate, and that is because it just depends on how the institutions took those budget reductions. So the next, I just wanted to give a summary of sort of the budget adjustments along with the restorations to give the committee an idea of where the total funding is for the funding formula institutions. So we'll start with adjusted base. That is essentially the budget that just carries over without any caseload growth or any of the other maintenance items. The inflation and fringe column there, the M100 and 300, those are adjustments that are applied by the governor's finance office for inflation and fringe adjustments. The largest portion of that really is the fringe adjustment for the 2% increase in the PERS contribution rate. The institution's share of that shows up in that column there. The total funding formula adjustments, that's the total from the previous slide that I showed you. And then next include the budget restorations to give you that last column, which is the total formula funding. And I show you all this to show you what the changes are for each of the institutions when you run the formula with the restorations. And you can see for most of the institutions, there is an increase over the base budget. But again, we have the 3 institutions there, CSN, GBC, and TMCC, who actually have, when you run the formula without any adjustments, end up with reductions over their base budget. I'm going to skip 25 because, again, same calculations. Next, I want to talk about enrollment recovery. So the governor's budget does include $12.5 million in one-shots for the 3 institutions that I talked about, CSN, TMCC, and GBC. And this is really to help those institutions manage the impact of the pandemic on their budgets. And really to help them retain faculty and staff as their enrollment recovers. So I think this next slide will help explain the enrollment recovery and sort of the mechanics of how it works. So using, again, the adjusted base as the comparison column, we take the total formula funding in the previous slides that we talked about, and then we add in the enrollment recovery, and then we show the total funding for each of the institutions. And really what you see there is the way the enrollment recovery works is it essentially keeps those institutions stable at their adjusted base level. So if you look at CSN, you can see that once we make all those adjustments, their FY24 budget is essentially the same as their adjusted base budget for the current fiscal year. Next, I'll talk about enhancements. So there are 2 enhancements included in the governor's executive budget for restoring DRI to their prior to 2015 funding formula. So in 2015, they instituted a new funding formula, which is based on their grant and contract activity. And funding from the state was determined based on a share of that grant and contract activity. And what has happened as those grants and contracts have fluctuated, so has the state funding. So what we are requesting is that the Desert Research Institute be restored to the traditional base maintenance and enhancement approach to funding. And this funding here represents the $2 million, represents the reductions that they took as a result of that change in the funding formula back in 2015. Graduate teaching assistants, we've talked about this one as well. So there are two decision units for the universities in there, E287 and E279. One is for increasing the rate of the stipends for the institution, and the other is increasing the number of graduate teaching assistants positions at each of the institutions. So the request here over the biennium is $19.9 million to do both of those things. Next is summer courses for teachers. So 20 years ago, the state invested in summer school for nurses to address a workforce shortage in nurses. So this is a similar request here. And the numbers that you see there are based on the summer weighted student credit hours for the institutions for last summer. Currently, nursing is the only discipline that the state funds in the summer. This request here, if approved by the legislature, would add teachers to that as well to allow us to increase that workforce pipeline for teachers. Next is the UNR at Lake Tahoe transition one-shot. I know these will come out specifically in bills, but wanted to talk about this in our presentation today. This is a $1.6 million request to recognize weighted student credit hours for students that attended Sierra Nevada University. Because they were not part of the NSHE system at the time, their weighted student credit hours were not counted in the funding formula when we ran it. So this makes an adjustment to include those SNU students in the funding formula. And we also used, just for the committee's information, we used information for students that were enrolled at UNR in the fall. Which is different than we traditionally treat the formula. So this makes an adjustment for those students in the funding formula. Two other one-shots that we have, and these are both for what we call Nevada Net, which is our statewide network that not only serves our NSHE institutions, but also serves various state agencies. The $3 million is for renewal of dark fiber leases that we have that are set to expire. And then the $5 million is one-time equipment costs that supports Nevada Net as well as other IT infrastructure at our system computing center. Not included, all of these are not included in our budget, but I thought it was important to talk about some of the state funded scholarships. So Silver State Opportunity Grant, that is one that's included in our budget. There's $5 million a year that is in our state budget. Nevada Promise, which is at the Treasurer's Office, there is included in the executive budget $6 million to continue that program. And then obviously the Governor Gwynn Millennium Scholarship Program, there is $75 million in the Treasurer's budget for that program as well.
Madam Chair, for the record, Dale Urquiaga, I'm going to talk about this slide and give CFO Klinger a chance to catch his breath. So in our original prioritized budget requests prioritized by the Board of Regents, our institutions suggested some economic developments or workforce development programs that they would seek investment dollars for. The idea being you give us a bucket of monies. We use those monies in the biennium to build a program or address a need. They are capacity building, and then that program becomes self-sustaining. That was the proposal. You can see, I'm sure, in the supporting documents, the kinds of programs from the various community colleges. When the Governor's Finance Office was preparing the Governor's recommended budget, they moved those dollars, so the amount is the same. They've simply placed the dollars in the WIN fund, the Workforce Innovations for the New Nevada fund, which is actually, I think, housed in GoEd's budget, not INCHI's. And while it is unusual for what we see as monies we are requesting to be moved, I think that this is an appropriate use of these dollars for what I referred to earlier, and that is coherence in the workforce system. So the WIN fund statute, and in full disclosure, I participated with members of this body and people who are in this room in writing the WIN fund statute some years ago in a different job. That fund, or that statute and that fund, operate to provide investment dollars where there is an identified need for workforce talent. And so as we try to participate in a coherent workforce development system, I think this allocation is appropriate. And I think our institutions will do a great job in presenting their plans and then having those programs funded to then be self-sustaining.
Thank you. Madam Chair, for the record, Chief Financial Officer Andrew Klinger. So continuing on slide 54, the governor's budget does also include funding for the UNLV Medical School. There's $9.2 million one-shot. This is intended to fund increased operating cost, as well as to allow the medical school to expand their staffing.
Madam Chair, for the record, Dale Urquiaga, the governor's budget added a request to those prioritized by the regions for a funding formula study. In truth, the system had requested a funding formula study. We had not budgeted toward that eventuality. The funding formula was created, I think, in the 2013 session, so we've operated for about a decade under the current funding formula, which you have heard described as weighted student credit hours. We've learned a lot about performance funding and the weighted student credit funding. We've also learned that certain institution types, most notably community colleges, sort of lose out in that funding formula. And as some of you have heard me say, the funding formula is today agnostic to student type. So if a student arrives with a different basket of needs, there's no way to address that. It's based on what course they take and their completion in discipline. And so as we think about access and we think about ensured success, we think about our students and we think about our institutions. And so we fully support the governor's request for monies to examine the funding formula. The governor added another dimension to a traditional funding formula study, and that is to look at accountability and transparency, particularly over our self-supporting accounts, which are, as you've heard Mr. Klinger say, entirely outside the funding formula. So in a sense, it may be two studies. There will be an RFP process conducted by two different entities. We've been asked by your staff where this number came from. In full disclosure, it came from the governor's office. They think this number is high. So if you're keeping a ledger of monies that you might reallocate to some other program, there's probably some money here that we will be turning back in a budget amendment to come either from the governor's finance office or our office. This is a very large placeholder number. Regardless of the size of that number, perhaps being too large, the import of those studies cannot, I think, be understated. The system, as it endeavors to serve the people of this state better, needs to review its funding formula so that we have the resources to do so, those resources that would be adequate and equitably distributed, as I have said previously. And I think this body and the governor have an interest in helping the Board of Regents establish guidelines and models for collaboration, transparency, and accountability.
Thank you, Madam Chair. For the record, Andrew Klinger, Chief Financial Officer. We had our presentation last week on capital improvement projects, so I won't spend too much time belaboring that slide. Slide 57, accountability reporting. Included on there is a website where we have our student metrics, our student dashboard. There are lots of metrics that are included on that dashboard, so I encourage you to visit that when you have time.
Madam Chair, for the record, Dale Urquiaga, I'll just sum up by saying just a couple final points, and then we'll be happy to answer your questions. So you've had us run through now that budget for a second time. I've tried to paint a picture for you of the system in its totality, and so I would take you back there. If you think about this system, our job is to ladder students into worlds of opportunity through various institution types and various award types. Our job is also to serve our communities here in the state of Nevada, and as I've described throughout the globe, through community service, through research, and through the economic impact, both of our own enterprise. Again, we employ 15,000 people, and the 105,000 lives who are in our stewardship on any given day, and then carry out into the system to carry out the economic need that we meet the economic need that we all have in this state. So I'd encourage you to think about us first as a system, and then about each individual institution and the role that they play in helping Nevada meet that challenge. And then again, I would represent to you that in our view, this budget is fairly reasonable. We are thankful that the governor has restored our funds. We are not here asking for millions and millions of dollars for new programming. I am new to this system, as most of you know, I think, and I think the institutions and the board have held the system together well through the pandemic. There is a rather rigorous accountability matrix that the board uses to measure persistence. That is, do our students continue, or do they get a little bit and then leave and then be left with debt without an award? And then the board monitors our graduation and completion rates. We have more work to do in terms of reporting to you the ultimate outcomes. What is the economic mobility, perhaps, of our students? We don't have that data today, but I would represent to you, as relatively the new guy here, that I think this budget keeps the system intact, more importantly, makes the institutions somewhat more whole in their ability to serve the 105,000 students. And then not included in our budget presentation, of course, you've already heard about the cost of living increases and the other benefits that may accrue to our employees. Our employees follow those same rules, and those benefits and increases are important to us as well. Our folks, like many others, have sat out during the pandemic times without increases, and we owe them a debt of gratitude. We also owe them some money, to be blunt. They make our system work, and so we are pleased to support this budget. The board has directed me to continue to work with this body on the enacting the governor's recommended budget to help both our students and our staff. And so with that, Madam Chair, we'll be happy to answer your questions or find someone in the audience who can.
Thank you very much, Chancellor. And we do have some questions. And I would invite, as we go through questions, if one of the questions is for one of the institution's presidents, please feel free to come forward to answer that if need be. And so we'll start with Assemblywoman Peters.
I just whacked myself in the face with this mic. So, thank you for the presentation today. This budget blows my mind every time we go through it. Very complex. And I have several questions, but I'll start with one related to the weighted student credit hours. Can you talk about the impact of the calculations that are resulting in the decrease of weighted student credit hours for certain institutions while increasing those for other institutions? And I'm particularly interested in what the impact to the budget is.
Yeah, for the record, Chief Financial Officer Andrew Klinger, Madam Chair, through you to Assemblywoman Peters. So on, I think it's on slides 37 is sort of where you see the impact on the decline in weighted student credit hours. And so on that slide, you can see that UNR, CSN, and TMCC, they have a reduction in weighted student credit hours, and that's primarily due to a drop in enrollment. There may be other factors in there as well, but it's primarily due to a drop in enrollment. And so the one-shot request that the governor has included in his budget is intended to hold those institutions that would otherwise lose funding. It is intended to essentially hold them at their current level, so the fiscal year 23 level. So there's a almost $12.6 million one shot included in the budget that would sort of mitigate that loss of weighted student credit hours due to their drop in enrollment. And part of the reason that it's a one-shot is we see this really as temporary, and as they begin to recover and as their enrollment comes back, and it depends on obviously what the funding formula looks like in the future, but if there is a funding formula that includes some component of weighted student credit hours, we would see them come back with increasing enrollments.
May I have a follow-up, Manager? So I'm looking at page 38, 39, and UNR is included in that decrease of the WICHE and amount calculations, but they're not included for a one-shot. Can you talk about the justification for that?
For the record, Chief Financial Officer Andrew Klinger, yes. So if you look at, it's actually a great question. If you look at slides 41 and 42, what ends up happening, and this is where I guess the complexity of the funding formula comes in. So if you look at that slide on 41 and UNR is the top line, while they lose in formula adjustments in that line, you can see there, due to, again, the loss of enrollment and the weighted student credit hours, because the restorations and other adjustments put them above what their current base budget is, they don't need an adjustment. So you see they actually end up, if you're looking at that slide 41, they actually end up with a 5.7% increase over their base. So really what we're trying to do is the funding is intended to keep those institutions, CSN, GBC, and Team CC, from falling sort of below their current adjusted base number.
Thank you for that, walking me through that. I'm looking at page 44 and 45, which is looking at the summary, and UNR is still trailing by almost 3% from the other institutions based on that formula account outside of the three that are getting that one-shot allocation. And just, I want to bring that up because when we're looking at inflation and the cost to students, that's a significant disparity and is not quite the jump of inflation that we're seeing and might be worth looking at further. Thank you.
Thank you, and Chancellor, go ahead, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. For the record, Dale Urquiaga, I guess I would simplify a response, Assemblywoman. When we look at restoration of funding, the 12%, or when we look at these enrollment recovery monies, we're talking about people. The institutions have either, using other reserve dollars, paid for folks to keep them in place, or they have left positions vacant. Absent these adjustments, those positions go away, those folks go away, which lessens our ability to serve students. We are some 95% of our budget probably is people. And so as I have had to learn about this budget in the last 8 months, that is how I think about it. Restorations are not money for fill in the blank. Restorations are for monies to serve students with someone in a classroom. That is largely who our workforce is. Or the board has set rather aggressive goals for increasing advisors, folks who help students move through our system and persist. And so I would ask you to think about it in those terms. And I know that's sort of the nexus of your question is, who are these folks? What are we paying them? And if we don't have these monies, they go away over time. And so it's why I think the board has done a nice job in presenting this budget to you.
Thank you very much. Okay, go ahead.
Sorry, and thank you, Madam Chair. I have a quick follow-up actually related to that discussion of the people that are required to run these institutions. Back on page 14, and you showed us this before, and it's really staggering, right? Like the academic faculty versus classified, and part-time. Can you give us just a brief breakdown on what percentage of faculty have teaching responsibilities in these institutions? Or can you follow up maybe with a breakdown of who is actually teaching versus who is administrative?
Dale Urquiaga, for the record, Madam Chair, through you to the Assemblywoman. I think I'll bring you that back because it's so different across the institutions. But you're correct. We have administrative faculty versus teaching faculty, and so we will pull that data and bring it back to your staff.
Thank you very much. And we'll go to Vice Chair Backus, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Going back to the performance funding portion of the calculation, I understood that it was originally thought to be eliminated, but the governor wanted to include this back into the calculation. So with that, can you please describe the process and factors taken into consideration by the Board of Regents when setting the performance targets, and how the targets limit the risk of the institutions from earning it back 100% of the performance set aside?
Madam Chair, I am phoning a friend.
Welcome.
Thank you. I get the low chair today. Renee Davis, Interim Vice Chancellor for Academic and Student Affairs. Excuse me. Thank you for the question. So in determining the targets for the institutions for the performance pool, there's a system-wide process where we get together with the business officers, usually academic officers, and work closely with the presidents to determine targets that make sense, that stretch the institution to continue to grow success for their students, but also are not unrealistic given all the parameters. So there's a process, and then that goes to the chancellor from this committee process, and we do that every 2 years.
Madam Chair, may I have a follow-up? With that, for the institutions that have experienced declines in enrollment and/or decline in weighted student credit hours, how are I guess my first part of the question would be whether that is now being taken into consideration, or if that was a factor that was being excluded during those conversations. But if it is being included, then how are they still meeting their performance targets for which the performance funding pool allocations are based on?
Madam Chair, for the record, to Assemblywoman Backus. So one of the things that we did in weighting is it actually gave us fiscal year 10, or I'm sorry, year 10 metrics. And so what we'll do is we will look at the most recently earned metrics, and there's a number of components to that, degrees awarded, and there's many components. And so because we have that year 10 data now, what we'll do is we will look at that and we will adjust into years 11 and 12 based on that. And we actually did this 2 years ago, and we actually increased the targets because we had several institutions, for example, that were at 150% of their targets. So we essentially went back in and reset those targets to more closely align to where the institutions were actually performing. And so for 11 and 12, we will go through the same process.
Thank you. And then, Madam Chair, I have a question, but I can wait. Or can I ask it now? It's later on. Okay. Taking you back kind of forward out of the funding formula, but to slide 54, I was just curious. It talks about UNLV's School of Medicine. And I noticed that it was a one shot of 9.2 million, but the scope of it was for operational costs and also faculty investment. And I was just curious why that was included as a one shot as opposed to included in the governor's budget.
Madam Chair, for the record, Andrew Klinger, Chief Financial Officer, to Assemblywoman Backus. So when we had included this, we did submit it as just an enhancement decision unit. and the governor's office moved it to a one-shot. Now, I do recognize, and I've had conversations with the staff from UNLV, that it's important that this funding continue into the future, because part of the intent here is obviously to hire faculty and staff, and so really the funding needs to continue.
Thank you very much. And we'll go to Assemblywoman Hadagi, and then we'll go to Senator Gansert.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Can I ask a couple of questions?
Sure.
Okay, thank you. I just had just one of them is really quick. I just had a really quick question when it comes to the research space and the research budget. You guys are removing the animal care from the budget. Why was that removed? Why aren't you including that office space in your research space for?
For the record, Taylor Kiaga, ma'am, could you give me a slide number and so I can call the right institution forward for you?
Oh, give me 1 second. It's at UNLV.
It's at UNLV. Then I will ask UNLV to step forward.
Thank you. I guess it wasn't that quick.
Welcome, Dr. Whitfield. Go ahead when you're ready. Is your microphone on, please?
Thank you, Chairwoman. And for the record, Keith Whitfield, WHITFIELD, President of UNLV. And my best move here is to ask my CFO exactly about that calculation, because there is an interesting calculation, because there are things that go into animal care that don't really apply to other things, and so we separate them out. If you would, Jean Vach.
Good morning. Jean Vach. I'm the CFO for UNLV, and I was involved, as was the other research institution, UNR, in a study over the past year about research O&M. It was something that was requested at the last legislative session, and as we went through that study, we identified that there were a few areas where both UNR and UNLV, most areas we were very consistent, and in a couple of areas we were not. And one of the things was in animal care, because animal care is often used on broader than research, and so we made a decision to ensure consistency to remove it from the UNLV calculation.
Okay, and now if I could ask my questions. Thank you, Dr. Whitfield. Thank you for the question. Okay. Now, my next questions are regarding the restorations of cuts that we had done during the 2021 session. So during the 2021 session, we approved GovRec, which created a hiring freeze for the institutions, about $47 million in each biennium, and you could no longer hire. But then later in 2021, we did approve some ARPA dollars that restored about $46.5 million in each fiscal year, which helped with some of that hiring. Were those positions filled, or could you give me a vacancy rate or where you are on those positions?
Madam Chair, for the record, Andrew Klinger to Assemblywoman Howdy. I will have to get back to you on the statistics of sort of what the vacancies are, but we've processed those essentially through the Governor's Finance Office, and so what we do is we seek reimbursement based on the number of positions that each institution fills, and I just don't have the vacancy rate of sort of where we're at, but I can get that for you.
Okay, and so if GovRec, Madam Chair, I'm sorry, can I continue along that line? Okay, thank you. So if GovRec is approved, it would completely restore 100% of those positions that were to be held vacant during that hiring freeze. Can you talk to me a little bit about what kind of impact this made to the students? Or was there any programs or services that impacted the students during that biennium?
Madam Chair, for the record, Taylor Kiaga, I'm going to ask any institution who wants to tackle this one, because they are closer to the students certainly than Mr. Klinger or I, and I know a couple of my institutions have examples they've shared with me, and I would not wish to share on their behalf, so maybe they will. There they are.
You have a phone a friend. Good morning. Please go ahead when you're ready.
Good morning. I wasted no time, so thank you. I'm Kyle Dalpy. I'm the president of Western Nevada College. To Assemblywoman Howdigee, we have in our budget restoration about 17 positions, all of which we filled. 6 of those are academic faculty. Several of those are classified. We have an advisor position. So it runs the gamut. So we did fill them, and it did allow us to continue to provide services for students and classes. And if that funding does not come back, we'll have to look at where we trim up to either keep those and lose something else or lose those. Does that help? Thank you.
Do you have another question? I'm sorry. Go ahead. No, go ahead. I just misunderstood.
Thank you. And this is my last question, Madam Chair. Thank you. And then just so, just for the record clear, this is only restoring cuts that were made during the 2021 session. This is not restoring any cuts that were made during the 31st special session in AB3, correct?
For the record, Chief Financial Officer Andrew Klinger, to Assemblywoman Howdigee, that is correct. So this is essentially taking the budget that was presented 2 years ago. It was reduced, part of it was restored, as you stated, and sort of this is the gap of what was not restored.
You are very welcome. We will go to Senator Gansert.
Thank you, Madam
Forgot
Chair.
which end of the dais you were on.
Right, thanks. We move around. Thank you. First, I wanted to ask about Lake Tahoe, the campus up at Lake Tahoe. And it looks like what you're trying to do, that the purchase was July 1st of 2022, so you're trying to pick up the weighted student credit hours for the past, which is about 1.65 million. And then is that now integrated in the budget? So this is sort of a one-shot to catch up because you provided those services in the past?
For the record, Chief Financial Officer Andrew Klinger to Senator Severs Gansert. Yeah, that is correct. So what this would do is this is a one-shot funding that would cover the upcoming biennium. But again, it depends on what the funding formula looks like moving forward. But the idea would be then moving forward, they would be included in the weighted student credit hours. And so whatever funding formula model comes out, they would be included as part of that, the SNU students.
Thank you. And then we talked a little bit about the UNLV Med School, the one shot that really is money that needs to be ongoing. Are they going to increase, and I don't know if I heard this, but I don't remember it, the number of students, their capacity with the increase of dollars?
For the record, Chief Financial Officer Andrew Klinger, yes, they are. The intent is to increase the number of students that each class, the capacity, essentially.
But by how many?
I will defer that to President Whitfield and his staff.
Thank you.
Thank you for that question. Again, Keith Whitfield for the record, President of UNLV. Was the question about the amount of growth that we're going to see or that we're predicting to see with that investment?
Thank you. So I was looking at how many more students are you increasing your capacity at UNLV Med School?
Right. So this first bit is to get us from 60 to 90.
Okay.
And the original goal was to get us to 120, and that's 120 students per class, a total enrollment of 480.
That's great. Thank you. I appreciate the answer. And then I was looking at law enforcement. It looked like some of the law enforcement positions were left off in general in the governor's budget. So I want to know if there was an amendment coming for that. So it looked like the total should have been about $500,000 for the 2 grade increase for UNLV and $382,000 maybe for Nevada Reno.
For the record, Chief Financial Officer Andrew Klinger to Senator Severs Gansert. Yeah, that is correct. We have submitted a budget amendment to the Governor's Finance Office. In the budget, there was an error in the classification. So when the Governor's Finance Office ran those adjustments, it didn't pick up the positions that should have been. But we have submitted a budget amendment for that.
Thank you. My last question is, in our notes, we have Governor's request for, it's titled Workforce Incentive Grant Program. Is that the WIN program, the $12 million per year? Is that the same?
For the record, Dale Urquiaga, through you, Madam Chair, to Senator Severs-Ganser. So the Workforce Investment Grant Program was a federally ARPA-funded program established during the interim to cover 3 semesters, essentially, of specific workforce investment grants. It does not continue in this budget. It's a one-time grant project. So I think what you're seeing is probably the intake of those
Incentive.
federal dollars. They will be expended in the same biennium, but it was pre-funded by interim finance.
Thank you. So I'm looking at GOED 23, E1 27. So the governor recommends general funds appropriations of $12 million each year for startup and support costs associated with the Workforce and Economic Development Program.
For the record, Dale Urquiaga, ignore what I just said, Senator Severs-Ganser. The program you're looking at is the Workforce Innovation for New Nevada Fund.
So
it
it
is
is the
an
WIN.
economic development fund. It's the WIN fund dollars of $12 million per year.
Right,
The
got it.
WIG fund, we love acronyms that all sound alike, different expenditure. My apologies.
Thank you. That was it.
Thank you very much. And can I just ask a quick clarifying question? When Senator Gansert asked about the UNR at Lake Tahoe providing services, could you clarify what services were provided there? I was under the impression that those students weren't, that payment wasn't made for those students' education. Tell me what services were provided.
Madam Chair, for the record, Chief Financial Officer Andrew Klinger. Madam Chair, you are correct. Prior to the July 1st date, there were not services provided, but because of the way the funding formula works and that it's a look back, so what we did is we made an adjustment for those students because those, and again, we treated it a little bit differently than we do normally under the funding formula. Because normally under the funding formula, when you look back and you count the weighted student credit hours, what you don't do is look at, are those students then registered in the fall? It's just simply a look back. So what we did in this case is we took the extra step of, so we looked back, looked at the number of weighted student credit hours, and then we only counted those students that had continued in the next year. So it's not for services rendered in the past, but it's for services in the future.
Okay, I'll ask more questions about that offline. Thank you very much. Okay, I think we are on to Assemblyman Miller.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you all for the presentation and the information today. I have a couple of questions regarding the summer teacher education programs, E281. And let's see here. Can you provide for us each institution's plans to extend the funds if approved, and how and when, how would this improve the teacher pipeline in the state?
Madam Chair, Dale Urquiaga, for the record, through you to the Assemblyman, would you like us to do that in follow-up, or would you like to hear from the institutions today, sir?
I'd like to hear from the institutions today if they are present.
They are.
Thank you.
Institutions, you're up. You do?
Hi, good morning again. Kyle Dalpy with Western Nevada College. I just want to make a note that the years under measurement, we have nothing at Western, and that's because we lost our full-time faculty member to a job out of state. So it is our intention to continue to offer education classes going forward because we have recontracted and hired a new tenure-track faculty member. Thank you.
Good morning, Darian Pollard, Nevada State College President for the record. Nevada State has always had a fairly robust summer program for the last several years in terms of teacher education. What these dollars will allow us to do two things. One, to have more courses offered for students, and as a result of that, be able to expand that pipeline. I think secondly, we'll also be able to provide those robust support services that are necessary to students, whether that be tutoring, writing centers, and other types of issues supported to that. So capacity building is truly what the grant is for.
Madam Chair, Federico Zaragoza for the record, President of College of Southern Nevada. At the College of Southern Nevada, our teacher preparation program includes 260 students that are in the teaching pipeline, and the summer will allow them to basically stay to their program of studies to complete in a two-year cycle. So the impact would be on 260 students to continue their program of studies.
Good morning, Madam Chair. Brian Sandoval, President of the University of Nevada, Reno, to you and through you to Assemblyman Miller. Thank you for the question. So I think the bottom line, and similar to what President Pollard talked about, is currently the summer programs are self-supported. By receiving the state support, we'll be able to expand our programming for our College of Education and Human Development students that are in the teacher pipeline, and therefore expedite their time to completion and then get those teachers out in the workforce.
Good morning, Karen Hilgerson, President of Turkey Meadows Community College, and for the record, at TMCC, we are able to meet the needs of our teacher education students during the course of the regular two-semester format, and by doing so, we do get the state FTE, which we would not necessarily get with this program. So our program is relatively small in size, so at this point, we're happy to meet the need during the traditional college schedule. Thank you.
Hi, Keith Whitfield, President UNLV. For us, this is about student success, and particularly trying to make sure that students have an opportunity over the summertime to be able to take additional courses that will shorten their length of time that it takes for graduation. So that amount of funding goes in with other support that we already have for students, but is to try to increase the number that we can actually offer financial aid to so that they can take courses in the summertime and support and shorten that time to graduation.
Madam Chair, for the record, Sonia Seibert, representing Great Basin College. Similar to the other institutions, we plan on using this money to expand our current offerings during the summer so that we can graduate additional students in a more timely manner as they're going throughout the year. In addition, we are also going to expand our alternative route to licensure program so that those students who have other post-bac degrees have opportunities to get into teacher education and out into the classroom sooner.
Good deal. Thank you all very much. And I probably should have asked you to provide some additional context as well. So maybe we can do this by a raise of hands. Which institutions currently offer summer courses? And maybe you could just provide direct, maybe you know that, which institutions currently offer summer courses for teacher education courses, would the recommended general fund supplant funding for these existing programs, or would it allow there to be newly created programs?
For the record, Dale Urquiaga, so I'll answer the last part of your question first. So this is an expansion. As you heard from a couple of the presidents, these summer programs today are self-supporting. The student pays. This allows us to expand and offset that cost. And as for those institutions that have a program, I am going to use your raise a hand solution and ask one person from my institutions who do offer summer schooling for education prep to raise your hand.
Thank you. And then, Chair, I just have one last question.
Go ahead, please.
Thank you. This question is actually for CSN. So I'll ask Dr. Zaragoza if he can come on up. So this is in reference to slide 18 of the presentation and the graduation rates. I was wondering, Dr. Zaragoza, if you could provide some context around the CSN graduation rates.
Federico Zaragoza, President of the College of Southern Nevada, for the record. What you're looking at are the IPET graduation rates, and they're the data that's used for accountability purposes. There's a couple of elements that I want to kind of clarify about that data, and then I'm going to give you some recent graduation rates for us. So in most cases, what you're looking at is a 3-year graduation rate, and then you've got to look at the year that's being reported. So the 16.4 graduation rate probably would have been the, and I think it's specified, is the 2021. So you go back 3 years to look at that cohort, and that was our graduation kind of rate for the IPED and the IPED cohort is only first time in college students. So it's a sub-element of the overall enrollment to begin with. But if I could, I want to kind of give you a better sense for the story for us. So our graduation rate for the last spring cohort was 19%. So we continue to see the needle moving in the right direction. But let me also remind you that 74% of CSN students are part-time students. So a better indication rate for us is a 6-year graduation term, and that's also within the IPEDS data, and that's 28%. One other element that's important here is that about 15% of our students transfer. That's called the Aspen rate. That's when you add the graduation plus the transfer rates. And that is what Aspen calls student success. So for student success, our graduation rates are around the 40% level, and we're very proud of that. We just presented to the Northwest Accreditation Commission, and we're one of the most improved community colleges of the country in performance excellence. So thank you so much.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. And we'll go to Assemblywoman Monroe Moreno.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I have just a few questions, if that's okay. Yes? Thank you.
I'm sorry, go ahead, please.
Thank you. I'm going to go to the increase for their graduate assistant positions. And in the governor's recommended budget, there's a recommendation for general fund appropriations of $20 million over the biennium. Could you let us know, could you explain in more detail of how this additional funding will support the graduate assistants and would help retain the Carnegie One status with the direct benefits that for that designation for both UNR and UNLV?
Madam Chair, for the record, I will ask Presidents Sandoval and Whitfield to come and talk about their programs.
Guys are going to get your exercise today.
Good morning again, Madam Chair. Brian Sandoval, President of the University of Nevada, Reno. For the record, to you and through you to Assemblywoman Monroe Moreno. Thank you for the question. We're very excited about this, and I think if you'd watched some of our Board of Regents meetings, you would have seen our graduate students that essentially their stipends had remained flat, but with the cost of living has increased dramatically, that really makes it difficult for them to make ends meet. In terms of specifically with regard to your question on our R1, Carnegie R1 status, an incredibly important component of the metrics associated with that are the number of graduate students that we have enrolled in our programs. So this is going to enhance our research mission. It's going to, if I can speak for President Whitfield, really improve our standing with regard to the Carnegie R1 rating nationally. So with regard to our research mission, this is just something that really is going to be a very important shot in the arm in terms of improving the university, giving our graduate students more opportunities, and expanding the number of graduate students that we have on our campus.
For the record, Keith Whitfield, President of UNLV. I wanted to say something intelligent, but I just want to kind of say ditto to my colleague, President Sandoval. He talked about two of the most critical points. One is that in the assessment of research institutions, they do look at the number of graduates that you have across different disciplines as well. And so one of the biggest impediments, it's for undergraduates and graduates, is the financing of higher education for those individuals. And so this stipend is absolutely critical. It also corresponds with the increase that we're seeing in terms of housing and inflation just across the board. And I can't remember how long it's been, but it's been a long time since assistantships actually were raised. And so they have been farther behind even than a lot of the other kind of pay scales that we actually take a look at. The second piece of it that my colleague mentioned is growing the number, and without trying to nerd out too much on you, but basically there's almost like a dome, and there's Research 2 institutions and Research 1 institutions. And what you want to do is to get as far away from that dome, other words, increasing your research expenditures, increasing your graduate students, and some of the other metrics. And so this is one of those ones to get us more solidly in that Research 1 category. It's not like we're close, because we are, our institutions are fairly close in terms of what their ranking is, or how far they are above that dome. But this will be extremely important to us, getting to a place where we get into that Research 1 space and stay in that Research 1 space. And so it's the work that those students do, not only in terms of them graduating and being enrolled, but also the work that they do with our researchers to be able to produce more research, to be more effective in terms of both carrying out the research that's being done, as well as competing for new research grants as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have 2 follow-ups. Okay. How would this additional funding help with the number, the compensation, in comparison to the peer institutions where students could go, but they're going to UNR or UNLV? How would this additional funding rank us in comparison?
Madam Chair, Brian Sandoval, President of the University of Nevada, Reno, for the record, to you and through you to the Assemblywoman. So it will help dramatically in terms of our peer institutions. And I can go back and get you the specific numbers, but we are below. And I will tell you, it is a market. And some of those graduate students will look to where they can get more money in order, and I don't say that in a pejorative way, but it's a very competitive environment for all the Carnegie high research institutions to get those graduate students. So by enabling us to increase that stipend, that allows us to be more competitive to get the best students nationally.
And for the record, Keith Whitfield, President of UNLV. The only thing I'd have to add to that is that as well, when you think about graduate students, for a lot of them, they don't come straight out of undergraduate. Sometimes they go back and work. And so the affordability quotient that we're talking about here is actually very, very important for them, for masters and for PhDs, to be able to actually afford to maybe stop working or significantly reduce work, and to be able to actually be able to participate in a graduate program is actually a pretty serious financial commitment on their part. It's one of the reasons why, and it's an interesting kind of symbiotic relationship. The better they're funded, the less time that they're doing all the other things that happen in life in terms of taking care of kids and all those other sorts of things, but the cost of it. This helps to offset that so they can stay more focused on what their trajectory is, which will get them out sooner and get them to where then they're earning that graduate degree salary that will help them in their life pursuits. And that's one of the things in terms of graduate student success that we talk about all the time.
Thank you. And Madam Chair, I have one last question on this
Please
subject
go
matter.
ahead.
I'll have more later. When looking at the money, how is it determined how the money would be split between the 2 institutions for the graduates? Are there more students in this program at one of the universities over the other? How was that determined where the money would go?
For the record, Keith Whitfield, President of UNLV. I was hoping that my colleague would try to answer that one first, but it's interesting what we'll be doing is taking a look. So there's 2 pieces of that. One is to actually raise the stipend, and then the other is to be able to provide some additional stipends in targeted areas. For us, we're going to make that assessment based on the productivity in terms of what they've been doing, some strategic priorities that we have. Engineering for one is one that we're trying to make sure that we grow that program, and also in the sciences. So it'll be used on some of their past performances, how many graduate students actually a department, a college has, and then also looking at their success, because we want to make sure that we reward those programs that are actually successful at graduating those graduate students.
Madam Chair, if I may, Brian Sandoval, President of the University of Nevada, Reno, for the record, to you and through you to the Assemblywoman. Obviously, there are two components to this. So with regard to the increase in the number of graduate or the GTAs, we have a lot of capacity. And so we'll be able to fill those. And I think one of the critical pieces to consider as you consider this piece of the budget is we are going to go out and recruit those graduate students now because we can't wait until the summer or else it's going to be too late. And so we're already out there aggressively recruiting these potential graduate student candidates for our campus. The second component, you'll see a difference with regard to the stipend rate increase. The two campuses have different formulas with that regard, so we won't need as much as the sister institution. And again, similar to the budget analysis, we don't want to get anything more than what we need. And so this is obviously what we need, and as I said, the capacity will really enhance our research mission.
Thank you for the answers. And I do have one last thing. You said something about the formula. Is the cost of living taken into account when you're looking at the formula of what those stipends are going to be?
That, and Madam Chair, to you and through you, to the Assemblyman Brian Sandoval, for the record. So, for example, in Northern Nevada, specifically Reno, the cost, of a one-bedroom apartment has gone from $900 and something per month to $1,600 and something per month. And when you're looking at a graduate student stipend of $15,000, it really makes it difficult to make ends meet. And I'm confident there are a lot of our graduate students who are watching this hearing. And again, they made a very compelling statement at the Board of Regents meetings with regard to that shrinking discretionary budget that they have to make ends meet. And they're having to pay more rent and take advantage of the food pantries on campus, all those things. So this will be incredibly beneficial, as my colleague, President Whitfield said, that allow them to concentrate on their studies rather than, the other necessities of life.
For the record, Keith Whitfield, President of UNLV. The only thing I would add to that is that, yes, we were definitely inspired by our students, I think, at that board meeting. But as we thought about what that actual increase could be, we did think about inflation. We knew we couldn't completely keep up with it. As I mentioned before, those rates were low to begin with, and so this is to help, but it doesn't actually catch them up to what national averages actually are. But it does move them significantly up. As my colleague mentioned, I think the housing piece of it is in the piece that is the most drastic, the biggest change, the hardest adjustment for students. I think President Sandoval said it accurately. It is taking away, I want to say it's disposable dollars, but for them it's not even disposable dollars. We are seeing increased uses of our food pantry, for example, and we don't target and track exactly who those students are, but we do presume that some of that increase that we're seeing is food insecurity that we're seeing in our graduate students. So it is tied to that inflationary piece. That is I think, part of our incentive to want to try to bring those up. But we didn't do it, 8% and trying to figure out exactly what that should be.
Thank you so much for the answers, and thank you, Madam Chair, for the additional questions.
Thank you very much. And with that, we will go to Senator Canizaro. Did you have a question?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. And this is sort of a question for each of the institutions, so everyone's going to have to come back up at some point. So for each of the institutions, what I am curious about is if you can discuss with us the operational impacts that are experienced in each of your institutions from actual enrollment patterns over the current biennium, and then changes to in-state and out-of-state student enrollments and institutions that you expect to experience over the next 2 years, specifically with respect to undergraduate student enrollments, graduate student enrollments, and professional school enrollments, and just what you see those impacts to be. And anybody can come up first. Don't be shy.
President Sandoval, you get an extra point.
Thank you, Madam Chair, to you and through you, to Senator Canizaro. I think your first part of that question, as I break it down, is with regard to enrollment. And I believe 72% of our enrollment are Nevada residents at the University of Nevada, Reno. I apologize, Madam Chair, Brian Sandoval, President, for the record. So right now, our enrollment is down, as you have seen, and so we are being very aggressive with regard to our recruitment strategies, and particularly within the state of Nevada. One of the complicating factors, and one of the things that surprised me, was that particularly in Washoe County, there are less high school seniors now than there were 4 years ago. And so that makes it difficult, because that obviously is one of the largest reasons where we attract our students. Essentially, most of our enrollment are students from Southern Nevada, Northern Nevada, and rural Nevada, and Northern California. So we will continue through the WUI program, the Western Undergraduate Education, to attract students from Northern California, but our efforts are going to continue to be concentrated in the state of Nevada. I think you asked what one of the impacts were. So with the restoration with regard to the budget, that will allow us to restore 42 faculty positions that we've had to keep vacant, which obviously affects the students' ability to time to completion, classroom sizes, student success. So that the budget restoration is going to be very critical for us to fill those faculty positions. And again, similar to what I talked about with regard to the graduate students, we have to recruit those faculty now. We can't wait till the summer. So if we are going to be recruiting faculty from other institutions, we have to make those offers likely before even the completion of this legislative session, so that they are able to be on campus in the fall. Was that responsive to your question, Senator?
It was. I think you sort of touched on the operational impacts from that for your students. And the other part of that question was changes that you might see to in-state and out-of-state student enrollments for the next 2 years. Like, do you see any of that? Are we going to expect to see that be the same? I know you touched on and talked about some of the recruitment efforts and some of the difficulties presented by the fewer seniors in Washoe County, but just what you might expect for those populations in the next 2 years.
Yeah. Thank you. For the record, Brian Sandoval, President of the University of Nevada, Madam Chair, to you and through you to the Senator. So I can tell you that with regard to next fall, we are tracking ahead in terms of the number of students that have accepted. We're waiting to see how many have enrolled, but we are up ahead in terms of accepted, enrolled, and provided a deposit, particularly with our Nevada resident students. So we are hopeful. I mean, it's February of 2023, and we'll know more in the next few months with regard to potential students that'll be attending our campus, but we are tracking several hundred ahead as we speak.
Great, thank you. That's very helpful. Is that, I know you're talking sort of probably about undergraduate student enrollment. Sorry, yes. I'm sorry, I didn't catch you before you took off. So my mind is still like asking the question as I'm looking at my notes. So that's true of undergraduate student enrollments. Would you expect the same? Like, are you tracking ahead also for graduate professional students, or are those different for those two populations?
If I may, Madam Chair, for the record, Brian Sandoval, President of the University of Nevada, Reno, to Senator Canizaro, I've similar to what the Chancellor talked about, phoning a friend, but I was going to invite our Provost, Jeff Thompson, who has more specific information with regard to graduate students.
Thank you, Senator. For the record, Jeff Thompson. I serve as Executive Vice President and Provost at the University of Nevada, Reno. The graduate student enrollment has a different time period than our undergraduate student enrollment. And it's also driven by support. So most graduate students come to the university are awarded teaching assistantships. We have seen growth, and we expect to continue to see growth. If the budget includes additional graduate student teaching assistantships, we certainly have the capacity and the need for those students. In the professional programs, they are typically capped either by accrediting bodies or by our ability to make sure students go through their programs on a timely basis. So we are not looking at increasing those programs at the moment, but our general graduate population, we have seen increased applications, and so we hope to have increased enrollment.
Thank you. Yep, you're good. Please, go ahead.
Good morning, Darian Pollard, Pollard, Nevada State College President for the record. I love your question because it captures, I think, the complexity of what strategic enrollment management is about. It's both anticipating what has happened, what's happening right now, and what may happen in the future. For us in Nevada State, it's particularly complex, I think, and probably not unlike many institutions of higher education right now, because the very nature of higher education is unlike anything that we've seen thus far. Previously, as indicated by the Chancellor, when you saw changes in the economy, where the economy contracted, you saw an expansion in higher education enrollment. That is not the case at this particular point right now. So for us, what we see to be the case is that our strategic enrollment management is targeting probably 4 to 5 specific areas. One, new students, traditionally age 18-year-olds who are coming to Nevada State from local high schools. About 80% of our graduates stay local. 90% of our enrollees come from our local Southern Nevada area. Secondly, transfer. We recognize and appreciate the phenomenal work done by our community colleges, so we hope students complete their associate's degree and then transfer to the four-year institution. Where we specialize at Nevada State are in those folks who have traditionally been minoritized in higher education, returning adults and those who have been underrepresented in higher education. So we're seeing a continued increase of those who are choosing to come to higher education after realizing that the work opportunities do not exist. And then, of course, because we are seeing growth in Southern Nevada, high school enrollment through dual credit and other early types of high school enrollment programs have been very useful for us. So what I anticipate for us, a continued growth at Nevada State, but as my colleagues and I are very thoughtful at the institution to talk about this, to have a reasoned growth. I am not looking for massive growth. We want to have a correction. As you've seen, Nevada State has had a phenomenal growth over the last several years. We anticipate in that space. And going to your last question regarding graduate students, we don't typically recruit students from out of state. We recruit students primarily in-state, but because we do offer a graduate program in a high-demand field area where capacity is significant, we will see growth in that area. The Board of Regents has allowed us to offer another graduate program, which we'll be exploring development to be offered next fall. And then we're also proposing another graduate program in another high-need area, such as nursing leadership. So I believe we'll continue to see measured growth at Nevada State into the near future.
Great, thank you. And with respect to the current biennium and your enrollment patterns there, can you speak to any operational effects or impacts that you have experienced at Nevada State?
Yeah, one of the questions earlier really spoke to this, is that our students, not unlike many others, when students have complex adult lives, those complex adult lives come to the classroom, they come to the buildings. So for us, the operational impacts have been not having enough employees oftentimes to meet the needs of students, longer lines, longer processing, trying to figure out how we move somebody from here to over here to meet indirect needs. What I'm also concerned about, to be quite frank, are those students who we have student workers who oftentimes help supplement what we do in the spaces and places that we're in. And many of them, quite frankly, are choosing, if I'm paying $15, $16 an hour for a student worker to work in a certain space within the institution, and they can go and make $18 or $19 entry level for warehousing type of work, who's the fool? They're not. They're going to go to the place where they can take care of them and their families. So those are significant implications for us. We're hopeful that as students recognize their long-term needs, they may choose to stay within the institution for that type of work.
Thank you.
Good morning again, Dr. Karin Hilgersum, President of TMCC, for the record. And first of all, thank you, Senator Nicole Canizaro, for the question. I think it's a great question in that it really gets at mission differentiation, which is something that we talk about in NSHE. And what is the mission of the university compared to predominantly two-year colleges like TMCC? I think one of the things I really appreciate holistically about the governor's proposed budget is the fact that there is additional money for the mission of research, which really does, in my opinion, predominantly belong to the universities. But there's also money for workforce training, which predominantly, I believe, falls into the mission of community colleges. So I want to speak about enrollments in that vein. Much like CSN, Truckee Meadows Community College serves mostly part-time students. So of our approximately 10,000 students, most of them, about 66%, are part-time. They do have jobs, they're raising families. The average credit count is about 9, okay? So none of those students, by the way, are captured in the IPEDS rate that you saw because IPEDS only looks at first-time, full-time students, okay? So it's a small cohort compared to the 10,000 students that TMCC actually serves. Here's the good news. Students are returning post-pandemic. We took a big hit during the pandemic. We also know that our Latinx students were the hardest hit. They probably had families to support. They lost jobs during the pandemic in the hotel economy and other economies related to pandemic losses. But they're coming back. We're actually seeing an uptick in enrollment at TMCC, and we are so appreciative that students are choosing again to transform their lives through the work that we do. We focus on, of course, high school students because we're local, we're affordable, we're accessible, particularly for the families that can't afford to have their students go out of state. So the vast majority of our students are Reno, Sparks, local folks. We also focus on working adults, and right now this is probably our biggest pool of students. We are seeing pretty quick growth in our technical areas, particularly in the manufacturing sector. Right now, we're doing hundreds of students along a certification path, so they'll probably earn anywhere from 6 to 15 credits to start. But they're working at Tesla, Panasonic, many small manufacturers in our community, and they're getting paid while they go to school through apprenticeships, and those are both union-sponsored apprenticeships and industry-sponsored apprenticeships through TMCC sponsorship recognition with the federal government. So when you look at these grad rates, it's a lot higher, and we're really good at this. We also are seeing growth in the sciences. This is the most exciting for me personally because I have a liberal arts background. We're seeing a lot of students major in biology, chemistry, engineering, things like that. So we're doing our very best to prepare these students so that when they transfer to either the University of Nevada, Reno or UNLV, they will succeed. And not only will they succeed, but they'll even do better their junior year than the students that started as freshmen at those two universities. And there's information on that too, which is pretty fun to look at. And I also want to say that one of the most heartwarming things for me is that back in 2019, right before the pandemic, for the first time in the history of the college, we had more Latino, Latinas, Latinx students majoring in the sciences and engineering than ever before, and the number was actually slightly higher than our white students, which was pretty cool. So with that, I think I answered all of the questions related to enrollment and who we're serving. I'm so grateful to work for TMCC. It really is an amazing institution. And I will close by saying, in order to continue on this trend of an uptick in enrollment, we are constantly looking to work with industry very closely to design new certificate programs. And we're offering new programs in general that we know students want and that also serve an economic need in our community. Thank you.
For the record, Keith Whitfield, president of UNLV. We've gotten a little distance from your original question, so I'll try to do my best to fill in and to try to add to what some of my colleagues have talked about. In terms of in-state, out-of-state, in-state 88%, about 12% out-of-state. But we do have intentions of growing our student population over the next, let's call it 10 years. And that will come from a combination of both in-state out-of-state and international students. There's support that is required for each one of those different groups, and even within the groups, there's variability in what's needed to be supported, but we're working on that as well. One of the things that we're also seeing is that for the fall, all of our numbers right now look up. It is still a little early. It's a much better time to be looking at those numbers, probably May 1. Because both for graduate and for undergraduate, a lot of decisions are made about that time, maybe a little before, a little after. Some of the areas that we're hoping to see increased growth in are those same ones that we have workforce needs for. Teachers, engineers, and if I was going to throw in another one, it would be cybersecurity. And we have a master's program in cybersecurity. I know one of the other institutions has an undergraduate degree. But that's one that has incredible needs in terms of having students pursue that path. And I think other than that, I would say that, through the pandemic, we saw small variations, actually far smaller than what you'd see across the nation. As you look at the east and southeast, you saw as high as a 10% drop in those numbers. I want to just take a quick moment to just say that one of the things that oftentimes we talk about is the demographic cliff of that. From 2008, you go 18 years and you look at birth rates and they are down. That's an important number to think about nationally, but actually in the West and in the Southwest, that percentage is far smaller than it is what you'll see in the Midwest and in the East. And so I think we can actually think about being very proactive about recruiting students. We have great institutions in this state that I think are probably underappreciated. But one of the things that I'm sure we'll be thinking about, I'm sure others will be thinking about, is that balance as well, because our primary goal is to be able to serve the citizens of Nevada. I will say, though, that so we rank as, in terms of our undergraduate population, as the second most diverse campus in the country. So diversity is high on our list. But diversity goes past just looking at ethnic minorities or looking at age. It's also from the background and experiences that people have. And so being able to grow some of those other student populations, that grows diversity in a way, too, that we want to bring into the classroom and make sure that then people understand. I guess the easiest way to call it is difference, is how do you see things differently than I do? This is another way, I think, internally that we're trying to build the quality of the education that our students get, is to have that additional experience and to capitalize on that diversity.
No, I appreciate that. I guess probably to your point originally, the question is really based on, what is your enrollment that you've actually seen over the last biennium? Has that impact your operational efforts? And then, how do you see those student populations, in-state, out-of-state, for undergrad, graduate, professional, whatever applies to the institution, either growing or not growing? Because that does impact, right, at the end of the day, how this budget is approved and how much of that is sort of student-derived revenues, how much of that is allocated by the legislature. And so we're trying to get at, I think, to your point, Dr. Whitfield, do you expect to see that same type of growth? Have you seen impacts from having less enrollment, or has it remained, fairly steady? That's kind of what I'm trying to get a sense of. So for everybody else, I think you've done a good job of answering that. If you have anything to add on the operational impacts from the last biennium, and you want to add something short to that.
Yeah, for the record, Keith Whitfield, president of UNLV. UNLV, LV, Las Vegas, betting town. If I was going to bet, I would bet that we're going to increase. It's going to be significant enough to pay attention to, but not one that's going to absolutely overwhelm us. What I'm hoping is as well as that we see that increase across actually all of our institutions. No one can take the kind of, a 5% increase. Those are hard to actually make sure that you have the operational capacity to be able to offer students a great quality education. But I do think that we're going to actually see an increase. Thank you.
Madam Chair, Federico Zaragoza, College of Southern Nevada. So we're a community college, so the out-of-state factor is minimum. 99% of our students are from the local community. That's been pretty constant over the years. where we've seen a significant impact on enrollment has been obviously that national trend. And I want to emphasize that the national trend was 20% for community colleges. So we were disproportionately impacted in the higher education space. And that has a lot to do with the profile of our students. The hardest hit populations during the pandemic, obviously, were low income, communities of color, and many of our displaced workers also that were impacted by kind of the changes in the labor market. And particularly, as was mentioned earlier by my colleague, community colleges have a majority part-time student population. So what we saw at the College of Southern Nevada was a lot of our students that were working all of a sudden without a job. And having to make a decision in terms of whether they could continue their education or not. And obviously, we saw a 15% decline. So kudos to a lot of our efforts in that while we were probably one of the hardest hit regions in the country, we were still below the national norm in terms of enrollment decline. So the way that we see us moving forward is by continuing to be very aggressive in terms of growing our dual enrollment populations. For the College of Southern Nevada, it's critical, and I will tell you that in the state of Nevada, we're probably lagging behind in the dual enrollment space, but we need to grow the number of students that actually are taking college courses. And I want to emphasize not just college courses, but program of studies. And I think the College of Southern Nevada is very intent in creating pathways. The Jumpstart program, which is just taking dual credit courses, is now Core 15. We want high school graduates to graduate from high school with at least 15 core credits that transfer to universities. We want to infuse CTE academies. We know that there's tremendous change in Southern Nevada in the market as it diversifies, and we know the growth sectors. Manufacturing is going to be adding about 6,000 jobs, and we're partnering with the city of Henderson now to build a center of excellence where we can train the new world-class technicians that are going to be needed in the college in Southern Nevada. But to do that, we need those partnerships. We need to have kind of that connectivity to the schools, and we need to kind of create those pathways into demand occupations. We also see an opportunity for us to grow a very, very difficult population. There's 250,000 individuals in Southern Nevada without a high school diploma. Many of those students are taking GEDs. And so we want to create, there's an ability to benefit program like high school students can take college courses. There is an ability to benefit program where GED students can in fact take college courses as well. So we want to really start getting into some of these segues where we're creating pathways for non-traditional populations. And I'll kind of end by emphasizing that the non-credit, if the funding formula were to include non-credit students, that would allow us to also delve much deeper into the incumbent worker population, as other community colleges have done across the country, because now you're able to create certificates of value that are affordable to both employers and to students. At this point, they carry 100% of the weight. So we're looking at all these variables. They're national best practices. I think we've been able to kind of turn the tide a little bit. We now have seen a 5% increase in our spring enrollment, and we're hoping that within a 2-year period, we can get back to hopefully pre-COVID level. That's our reach goal. In terms of the restoration of the formula, we have 64 positions that would be impacted by budget restoration. Thank you, ma'am.
Hi, good morning again. Kyle Dalpy, Western Nevada College. I'll try to sprinkle in something new from our perspective as a rural serving institution to answer the first question, and probably the easiest, is we have about 2% of our students are out of state. We don't go after out-of-state students. Sometimes I pull a list to see who they are, but our primary mission is to serve our traditional service area, which spans 6 rural counties. And I can honestly and sincerely say high school students scare me, and I say that in a nice way. If you have high school kids, you probably feel that way, but the population scare me because we are now 32% dual enrollment students of our head count. And as Dr. Zaragoza said, we are actually behind the nation. There are some schools tracking at 50+% dual enrollment. What bothers me and what scares me about that is from an enrollment management standpoint, if we see that cliff, we're going to go down in enrollment. That's going to affect our funding. If our funding down the road gets affected, it just helps us, to your point, Senator Canizaro, it affects our operational ability going forward. So we're watching that, and the way that we're doing that is we are looking at other programs to expand and get into the workforce with training programs. I'll throw a few shameless plugs in here. I know it's on the list somewhere, but we do have a very robust prison education program to help train soon-to-be-released incarcerated individuals to join the workforce. We do have, like I said, the robust high school. Back in a special session in 2020, the Career and College Readiness Grant that went to most of the districts was pulled back and zeroed out. That affected a number of our partners, including most of our service area, which includes Lyon, Douglas, Churchill, Mineral counties. So down the road, supporting the dual enrollment piece is huge for us operationally, and we will continue to find ways to do that. We've had donors come up. We've had a foundation at Carson High School support students, but the state appropriation that we had in the past was the way we kept that going. And then finally, the workforce funds operationally are key to us. We have pulled down significant funding from the WIN funds. The new version of that will help us support emerging industries. We are 100% at WNC into this new battery and recycling technology programs that are emerging. It's the new thing in applied manufacturing. We are looking at our partners all the way from Story County through the Trick down into Carson City, and we're building programs there, and it takes money to stand up those programs. And as the funding formula goes, I've been in the state to see the previous funding formula. Now I see this one. I guess that classifies me as some sort of historian, but we are looking back to see how much money we're going to get in the future while we're trying to deal with the present. And so these funds help us stand up programs that can meet the workforce needs. And I am absolutely, from an operational standpoint, looking at diversifying our enrollment portfolio to include more incumbent workers, anybody who's not a high school student, just to be able to build the workforce up so then the bottom level jobs become available for the recent graduates that can enter those careers. If that helps, I can answer any other follow-ups. Thank you.
Good morning again. Thank you. For the record, Sonia Seibert on behalf of Great Basin College. Similar to Western Nevada College, Great Basin College serves the rest of rural and frontier Nevada. And within our rural communities, we have seen our population base decrease, therefore affecting our enrollment levels also. However, we have created our baccalaureate degree programs based upon growing our own. So those students come from our communities, they graduate with our bachelor's degrees in teacher education and nursing, and then they stay in our communities and make those communities better and stronger as we move forward. In addition, Great Basin College has expanded in offering a number of degrees fully online, plus also course offerings, which has allowed us to expand not only through the state of Nevada, but also throughout the country in increasing our out-of-state enrollment and throughout the world. So this provides us some other opportunities for this, for the decrease that we're seeing in our rural areas. We'd also like to thank our partners with the Nevada National Guard, who recently transferred the Armory building to Great Basin College and the University of Nevada, Reno and Board of Regents, so that we can continue our collaborations with the University of Nevada, Reno in the establishment of a mining center. This mining center will provide workforce development and contract training opportunities to our workforce in northeastern Nevada, which primarily is in the natural resource extraction industry. In addition, it will provide STEM opportunities and continuing development for our teacher education students and also those currently involved in the K-12 system. As far as operational needs, the establishment of the enrollment recovery funds and the restoration of the budget cuts, those will provide opportunities for us to keep our levels to students at the same levels we currently are operating at and not to erode into our one-time funds, such as our reserves, in order to keep those levels to the same level. We are currently looking at keeping 4 to 5 positions on the academic side with these funds, and also the cost of supplies and educational resources to our students, such as the library, electronic databases, which are so important, those have increased over time. So we are also looking at covering those operational costs with these budget restorations.
Thank you very much, and Dr. Dalpe, don't go far because I believe Assemblywoman Peters may have a question for you if Senator Canizaro is done.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I had a follow-up question on the prison education registration fee increases. Could you just talk about what's causing that increase? I mean, it's pretty significant. In the first year, we're looking at a almost 30% increase in registration fees for that service. And then in the second year, a 15% additional increase. Just curious what's going into that.
Hi, thank you. Kyle Dalpe, Western Nevada College. The increase for the next 2 years? So I believe there's restoration built in there. I'll have to maybe do a follow-up on that, but those budgets were cut as well. And so there was the restoration for those funds were built into the biennial budget going forward, if I'm not mistaken. Is it?
So this is specifically showing up in my notes around the registration fee increases, fee revenues. Yeah, so increases. And then I guess I'm just curious who's responsible for paying that increase, and then what that increase provides for those students in that prison population.
Okay, so I can follow up more specifically with Kyle Dalpe for the record with in relation to that particular budget, but any increase, we have registration fee increases anyway that go into effect, and we charge the same going into the prisons. Students in the prisons pay for some of their fees, registration fees. We have donors that support that, and the state allocation pays for that depending on the category of the inmate. I can elaborate on that, but that's a little deeper discussion on prison ed.
Yeah, maybe we take this offline, but I'm not seeing this consistency between your fee increases at the institution versus these prison education fee increases. So there's a disparity there in what is causing those.
Yeah, Kyle Dalpe for the record. If I could get back to you, I'll do research on that. Thank you. Yeah. Oh, wait. Okay, actually, my phone a friend came up, so let's see if we can get it done today.
Good morning. For the record, Cora Lopez, CFO, Western Nevada College. I believe the increase is because due to the pandemic, we were not allowed to be in the prisons at the levels we thought we could be. So we're projecting increased registration fees there.
So Kyle Dalpe for the record, that makes sense. If you're talking about the individual per credit fee, I thought that's what you're meaning, but the overall budget would increase because we were not able to provide those services due to the prison conditions during the pandemic.
Let's follow up because I think, we're talking about a couple of different line items, and I just want to make sure that I'm understanding where these costs are coming from.
Thank you very much. We'll go next to Assemblyman Yeager.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I had a few questions on the Desert Research Institute 3010 budget. So I want to make sure we have the right folks at the table first. Thank you for being here. So I understand that there was a change back in 2015 about how Desert Research Institute is funded, and part of the recommendation from the governor is to essentially change back to how we did it in 2015. So could you just give me at a really high level, because I was not here in 2015, what it was like in 2015 versus what the current funding formula, I'm sorry.
Good morning, Kambut Acharya, President of DRI. Chair, through you to Assemblyman Yeager. So in 2013, DRI's funding formula changed from a base plus maintenance model. The current funding, the formula that was given to us was based on if we were bringing in a lot of external grants and contracts, that would increase the state funding. But the formula that was given didn't work that way. So, for example, we've lost nearly about $10 million since the funding formula was implemented. So that performance-based model was I think the intention was to help DRI, but it didn't work out the way that it was intended. And I think the percentage that was proposed originally wasn't what was given back to DRI. It was cut. And so every year we've been losing about $1 million. And so even though DRI has actually, the last few years, performed quite well in bringing grants and contracts to DRI, that hasn't reflected in our funding formula, the amount of money that state has given back to us. So ideally for us, so what we have to do is to run our institution, we charge overhead on our grants and contracts. So we have to take money from our overhead to actually fill in that gap that was created by the change in funding formula. So this would take us back to that funding formula where everything is calculated based on our administrative staff as well as the research space that we have. Very similar to how the other state agencies and UNR and UNLV's research is funded. That's what we're asking.
Thank you. Could I ask a follow-up, Madam Chair? So thanks, that's very helpful to know. And so I'm assuming the recommended change to go back to how the budget used to be, that is dependent on getting funding levels that were commensurate with what you got in the 2013 and 2015 timeframe. Is that right?
Correct.
Okay. And then just one last question, if I could, Madam Chair. You mentioned a little bit about some of the challenges with the way you're funded now, having to essentially use money for overhead. But I just wondered, beyond that, could you just talk about what anticipated efficiencies you would get from going back to a funding policy that's based on base, maintenance, and enhancement?
Thank you, Kumud Acharya, for the record, DRI President. I'd like to share with you one number. So every dollar that we get from the state, we bring in additional $4.82 from out of state to the state. Just imagine that the increase, how that would impact DRI. So in the last 3 years, we've grown from about external funding. Typically we get about between $7 and $8 million from the state per year. And we were bringing about $32 million, but now we've grown to about $44 million a year. So if the funding formula was changed and were taking us back to the same level that we were funded, that will allow us to grow even more. There's a lot of opportunity out there for research to grow right now. So this will make us, this will allow us to really grow significantly in terms of grants and contracts that we bring into the state. Yep.
Thank you very much. And next, we'll go to Assemblyman Miller and then to Senator Neal.
Thank you, Chair, for this additional time. I have a question for a couple of our, probably for our universities, or those who offer bachelor degrees in like social work or mental health services. I'm curious to know if we are seeing a decrease in enrollment in those fields, as we had heard in a previous hearing that they were having a hard time staffing. So I'm curious to know if we're seeing like a decrease or a trend of a decrease in enrollment in fields like social work or mental health professionals, or if we're just having a problem retaining them in the state post-graduation. So whoever may have some context on that would be helpful. Thank you.
Madam Chair, for the record, Brian Sandoval, President of the University of Nevada, Reno, to you and through you to Assemblyman Miller. Our enrollments are actually up in those two disciplines, the social work and mental health counseling.
Darian Pollard, for the record. Nevada State does not offer a social work program, but we do have a robust psychology program, which is a direct feeder to many who are going to work in the mental health field. What we are seeing are continued high, very strong enrollments in those programs, so much so that we are also offering a graduate program in this space, and particularly around school psychology, because we recognize there's a profound need for that. We've also been able to receive a congressionally directed grant that will allow us to provide mental health clinic on our campus for our students who are going to be training to go into those fields, but also for students who are in the school system who need additional supports in mental health. So what I do think your question also, though, captures is the broader one, going to your earlier conversation around teachers, that the environment in which many of those folks who are working in the field are having to make some of the decisions about whether they would continue to teach or to work in those spaces as you described because of the environments in which they're operating oftentimes. Thank you.
For the record, Keith Whitfield, president of UNLV. Just checking our numbers, they're strong, but we can't grow anymore, just partly because we don't have the faculty to be able to grow out the program. I think, to add on to what my colleague said, there is interest by students who are interested in studying and doing good in social work and allied mental health sorts of fields. But in part, those are teaching intensive sorts of courses. There's a lot of individual one-on-one that ends up going with them, and so there is a need to make sure that you have the adequate number of faculty to be able to grow past it. But our numbers right now in the social work field are strong. Thank you.
So we have the strong numbers in enrollment. Are students completing and staying in those disciplines? And then I don't know if you guys have the data, but if we're still not having an issue filling positions, are they then graduating, if they're staying in the discipline, graduating and then leaving the state or going into different fields? I'm just trying to figure out, if anybody has context on that. Thank you, Dr. Whitfield.
I'm looking and see no one. Keith Whitfield, for the record, president of UNLV. Why don't I get you that information? That's a relatively granular piece. Perhaps even the chancellor could look across our institutions and be able to take a look, because that's a drill down into a very specific area that it takes a little bit to figure out. Because the other part of your question is actually the tracking of those students and what happens once they graduate, and that always takes a little bit more to try to find because there's not easy mechanisms to be able to track people as they're going out. I can tell you though that it's very, very complex. Part of it is some of the out-migration that we're seeing in terms of not even people necessarily, but jobs, that they will go and see if they can get a remote job opportunity someplace else. Telehealth and telemedicine is booming right now. And so people in that, I'm trying to set you up to say that I don't know how exactly accurate our numbers are. About what our students are doing once they actually graduate and stay. We do try to encourage them, I think in the social work field and some other fields, to actually go for graduate programs as well, because for a lot of the kind of work that needs to be done, you actually need at least a master's degree. That's not completely true for social work, but again, it's an advantage for students to ultimately get that graduate degree as well. So that's another piece of tracking maybe we can provide for you.
Thank you very much. Go ahead, please.
For the record, Sonia Seibert on behalf of Great Basin College. Well, I don't know the enrollment trends in our program. For a number of years now, we have cooperated with the University of Nevada, Reno to offer a 3+1 bachelor's degree in social work, where they attend 3 years at Great Basin College, and then their last year is at the University of Nevada, Reno.
Thank you very much. Okay, with that, we'll go to Senator Neal, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I don't know if my question is for the Chancellor or the other institutions, but I've been listening to the conversation, and I just wanted to go back to the formula. So you're planning on having the study. You have the $5 million study, and when I was listening to the different institutions talk about who's in their current focus, we have first year, transfer, returning adults, and then I think it's still, well, to me, returning adults are still working adults. And so I'm wondering, within this performance conversation, how are you going to treat, I guess, these categories that they're discussing as their new focus? And what I'm not hearing is, I guess, the supports that will be built in, or if that will be a metric. And then also in the existing formula, we have underrepresented groups, right? And what I've heard more often than any other is Latinx, Latino, but not African American students, and where they fit into the discussion across institutions in these categories, right? Because more often they're probably the returning adult or the transfer student, because from all of the data, high school and other, we've seen that those are the populations that didn't necessarily graduate, that might be rethinking or rethought during COVID. And so I'm just wondering how this conversation, and I guess in the future for the study, how these factors that have been brought up today will be examined for the future.
Madam Chair, Dale Urquiaga, for the record, to you and through you to Senator Neal. Thank you for this question, and because it allows me to nerd out about funding formula conversations, which I enjoy. Before I forget and get to your specific question, I want to go back to the request about longitudinal data in the mental and behavioral health space. I've seen my staff has run numbers like that for nursing and for teaching, and so I heard the President volunteered that the Chancellor might answer that question, so I'll have those numbers run in that space as well. It's such a topic of conversation, so we'll bring you that. To Senator Neal's specific questions about a funding formula study, so here's how one might approach this. We've had a essentially performance-based formula that is targeting disciplines and credit type for 10 years. So what we ought to do in a funding formula review is look back and see, just to your point, did African American students benefit from this funding formula? What were completion and persistence rates across all ethnic or racial groups? Because we might infer, as you have, that folks were treated differently based on their sort of starting point in the current funding formula. So before we tinker with it, we ought do an analysis of what we got for the last 10 years. We can, one could, look at the performance by discipline type, by weight type, and then across our students. So that's one place that I think a review of a formula like this after a decade could start. What were the actual outcomes? I can tell you the money outcomes, how much funding rolled to the institutions, and I can tell you in the aggregate, my graduation rates across this institution have all gone up, but not for all populations equally. And so I think we ought disaggregate and look backwards over 10 years of data. So that is one starting point I think that will be important. You've heard the institutions, and to some extent me, talk about new categories or considerations that might be added to a funding formula. One is the student types that you have mentioned, that you have heard the folks talk about. So today there's no allowance for that. They're all the same if they're taking English, and they're all the same if they're taking engineering. So in the way that the pre-K-12 funding formula over these last many years has looked at adequacy and ended at a system of weights, one might experiment with modeling during a study such as this about what weights would look like in this space. That is, in addition to my weighted student credit hour performance, I might get, as an institution, additional funds based on student type. Part-time who take only 9 credits who have to work because they need more financial aid or more housing assistance in order to become more full-time students, or students who come at some level of poverty, or students traditionally marginalized who have remained flat in their enrollment or percentage. So we could, and this is being done in a couple states in the nation today, begin to look at adequacy based on student type. And that would get to some of those populations that you've heard our presidents speak so eloquently about. And then lastly, to return to an earlier point that you have heard from me and them, institution type, and by that I mean workforce development programs, certificated programs, are today, as we used to say in K-12, completely outside the formula. And so the governor himself asked me this question the other day: what portion of those programs should be state supported? Should they count for some weighted student credit hour or some other level because of the need? If the state is in need of HVAC professionals, and we are, ought the state incentivize the growth of that certificate in the way the state has historically incentivized professional positions such as nursing and teaching? So it becomes Senator, a very complicated funding formula review. It's not just about, well, how do we rejigger the existing funds so that they maybe do a little better job from an efficiency perspective. I believe that it is important for the system and Nevada and this legislative body to examine what outcomes do we expect from the system of higher education in terms of economic mobility. I'll give you that one. And then roll backwards to, in order to get there, to change the slope on graduation or persistence by demographic group or institution type, I need these funds. Does that help?
Yeah, Madam Chair, just a quick statement. So thank you for that, super helpful. I think one of the things to maybe consider in the future, or the institutions to consider, I think there are different supports that should be in the formula. I think the support for a returning adult and the support for a first-year student are very different. And I know this only because I deal with the returning adults at NSC. And what they need is an entirely different category of support because the system is set up assuming that they're 18 again, and they're not. They're 45. And what they're looking at and what they want are different, and we don't offer the support, nor do we treat or examine their condition or status or matriculation in the system. And I think we should. Because they're also your quick complainers, because they've been adults for a long time, so they know what to argue about, versus an 18-year-old.
Is there an amen for that?
Madam Chair, I couldn't agree with the senator more.
Okay.
Not about the complaining part, certainly.
You can.
Everyone
you can.
complains to me exactly the same, ma'am. But certainly, I agree with you. And a third of our students are in that, quote, non-traditional age band, and yet there's no recognition of that. They may be parents. They may be working differently. And so if you look at data, we could ask them. They would tell you cost is one, that's across, but they would also tell you in that age group time that the course is offered and modality, the manner in which it is provided. Well, we're not funded for time and modality. We're funded for this set bricks and mortar largely model. And so I think you are asking the very right questions, as I told you the other day, that I look forward to this funding conversation over the biennium for the state. I think it's critical for the performance improvement that y'all expect from the system of higher education and the economic mobility that we all hope for Nevadans.
Thank you very much. We will go to Assemblywoman Hadagi and then Assemblywoman Monroe Moreno, and that may wrap us up, hopefully. Thank you. Go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I actually have a question for Nevada State College. I have Dr. Pollard. Thank you, Dr. Pollard. It's my understanding that you're interested in, there's talks about a name change. And so I was kind of hoping you could give us a brief background on why the name change.
Darian Pollard, for the record. Thank you very much for the question. I have recommended to the Board of Regents for their consideration a renaming of Nevada State College for a couple of reasons. One, I think that my predecessor had started this work for many years, looking deeply at the value proposition and how the institution brands itself in the broader community. If we can agree upon the fact that the majority of higher education does not have a distinction between the word college and university, it's very regional, and it's based oftentimes on how one sits on one side of the Mississippi or the other. If you are also a private institution, small liberal arts, whatever the case may be. West of the Mississippi, and certainly within our accrediting region, there are very few, I think there are only 2 four-year institutions that offer baccalaureate degrees that have the name college in them. We also have to recognize, I believe, that higher education, much like many institutions across the country, and I would even say other industries, evolve. And what we have found is very clear, a couple of things. One is that many of our students have brand confusion or dissonance when they understand what higher education is. And for us, the idea in our region, we have a phenomenal community college there, College of Southern Nevada. You have a 4-year institution offering the baccalaureate degree and niche graduate programs, that being Nevada State College. Many of our students are confused with the notion of going to college once and then going to college again, understanding that value proposition. The other is that the literature is actually very clear. Depending on whatever survey you look at, Nevada ranks 46th, 47th, or 48th in terms of the number of adults who have earned a college credential. So I think we have to change the education narrative of the state. Workforce development is economic development. And for us to be able to have a different narrative around what higher education is that we have to stay with the times. What's important for us at Nevada State is that our student population, 50% are first-generation college students, 70% are students of color. 80% of them stay local to become the teachers, nurses, and leaders of our community. They want a name that has the same value proposition as many people in our community. There are studies that have been done that a student who has attained a degree from institution that moved from college to university, they see a $5,000 to $7,000 increase in their annual salary. You compound that lifetime, why would we deny those students access to that? The other thing that's important about this is that we also see an increase in name when you change the name of folks who choose to go to college. We need more people to go to college. And as a result of that, the idea of saying that if the university name represents and has a value proposition for them, let's do that. But let me be very clear about a couple things, and I'll be very quick in this. We have a phenomenal set of R1 institutions in the state. University of Nevada at Las Vegas, University of Nevada at Reno, they do the work of producing scholarship, and we need our R1s to do that work. We have a robust and phenomenal community college system. I have no interest in Nevada State sitting in that space. We sit in a unique space primarily geared toward producing students to step in and build the middle class. University is a name that is recognizable. It recognizes the changes in the system. We're not asking for a funding formula change. In fact, I reject that premise. I don't want no parts of the land grant conversation. I understand you all had robust dialogue last session on this. And more importantly, we see ourselves as occupying a space that already currently exists. This is what we do. So I'm very hopeful that the Board of Regents will consider this, and I'm very pleased that so many of our colleagues understand and our business community and others value what we've offered. Thank you.
Please, thank you very much, and please go ahead, Assemblywoman Monroe Moreno.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And thank you, Assemblywoman Hadeghi, for asking the question. If there is a name change, would the renaming of Nevada State College have any budget implications, financial impact to the system? And would there be a change in the student fees, an increase of student fees, if the name change were to happen?
Darian Pollard, for the record, and this response is for the record. There is no fiscal impact to the state. The overall fiscal impact is minimus, primarily around marketing, and we will use existing operational dollars or private philanthropy to accomplish that. There will be no changes in the funding formula, no changes in scholarships. We clearly recognize that we will continue to be the best value to attain a baccalaureate degree in the state, and we'll continue to operate in that space. That's all we want to do. It's a renaming, not a mission change, not a formula change, not a status change, not any of the other rumors that abound.
Madam Chair, Dale Urquiaga for the record, and I would add to that, the board's conversation thus far has included direction to my office to examine the handbook, which is the policy the board creates to govern the system that would ensure what President Pollard has just indicated to you, that there be no change. And also the conversation that will happen at the next board meeting would be about ensuring that the legislature similarly codifies that. And so this is while the intent is very clear from President Pollard, I, as the guy who sits at the system office, has to worry about what some future president or some future sister institution some other group might infer. And so my commitment to the president and to my board and to this body has been that we would follow any such decision to codify into the law and into our policy that what the president said remains true.
Follow up, Madam Chair.
Please.
Thank you for that. Do we have a time frame of when the regents, the Board of Regents, would be making that decision? And is there a bill draft that's been prepared to codify that language by the legislature?
For the record, Dale Urquiaga, so the board will consider the matter again at its March 9th and 10th meeting. It is agendized for that time. And it is my understanding that, yes, there is a bill draft. I've spoken to a senator who has a placeholder bill and has asked me to for language that the president has indicated, particularly to the land grant status, but would it also include clarification of what a university is without geeking out for the lawyers. The word university does appear in our Constitution. And so your lawyers and my lawyers want to be sure that our intent is clear and that you create that differentiation in the manner that the president has described for you.
Thank you so much. And just one last thing.
Please.
Student fees. If the name change does happen, which I think you know how I feel about that, will the student fees be increased for the students attending Nevada State College?
Madam Chair, Dale Urquiaga, for the record, ma'am, no. So the board's direction and the president's request has been that the handbook be clarified such that student fees and admission requirements remain the same. Again, it's in our interest to make that change in policy and to trailer that along, if you will, in legislation to ensure that that remains true in the future.
Thank you, Madam Chair, for the questions, and thank you for the answers.
Thank you very much. And with that, I just have one comment, and it will be for Dr. Pollard really quick. Former Regent Thalia would be so happy. She was about advocating other opportunities for students and not inhibiting those. So I think Nevada State College has done that within our system, and we have a lot of different avenues for kids and adult students for a reason. And I think that this discussion today has been part of that. So thank you very much. And thank you, Chancellor, for your time today.
Madam Chair, members of the committee, thank you for allowing me to represent this system. And I want you to reflect for a moment on the institutional presidents and representatives who cycled through here. You should be very proud of your system of higher education, whether that's the board or the folks who have cycled through here. I think we come before you as a unified system, asking for the resources to deliver workforce certificates through PhDs to Nevadans who come to us. And it was fun for me to watch as the guy who sits where I sit. When I took this job, I said that, like Julie Andrews, I was only here until arrangements could be made for a new chancellor. Next time I come to committee, Madam Chair, I'm bringing my guitar so that they can all just sort of cycle through like the family Von Trapp. I am very proud to be a part of this team, and I'm proud to serve with them even for this brief moment. So thank you for your attention and your excellent questions today.
Thank you for your service to our great state, and thanks to all the presidents that are here today. We have appreciated your comments and your ability to work within Nevada and make it a better place. And with that, we will close the hearing, and we will move to public comment. Please remember to state and spell your name when you come to the table. We will start here in Carson City, and then we will go to Las Vegas and then to the phones. And if you have something to say that somebody else has said, you're always welcome to say ditto. Thank you.
Kent Irvin, ERVIN, Nevada Faculty Alliance. We work to empower our members to be fully engaged in our mission to help students succeed. Higher education develops responsible citizens, promotes social and economic mobility, and trains Nevada's workforce for economic development. Our public colleges and universities provide professional education as well as career and technical training, multiple talent pathways for economic prosperity. Unfortunately, there's been a long-term national trend of decreasing state support for higher education and increasing student tuition, reducing the affordability and accessibility for students. In Nevada, as shown in our written submission, state appropriated revenue per student FTE enrollment decreased by 34% after inflation from FY 2007 to 2022, while resident student fee revenue per student FTE increased by 65% above inflation. The state contributions to the cost of per student has declined significantly over the same period from about 2/3 to 1/2. There are good things in the governor's budget proposal. The graduate assistantships are crucial for our graduate students to survive and to complete their programs. The one-shots for pandemic-related enrollment declines at 3 community colleges are sorely needed. The proposed budget brings NSHE's state appropriate operating budgets back from the pandemic cuts. However, it does not fully address the high inflation over recent years. We will still have to stretch to do more with less. We also support the formula funding study. The study should not only consider the cost of offering courses and degrees, but also the support and resources that our diverse student population needs to excel. Investing in higher education for Nevada's economic prosperity means reversing the long-term decline in state support and making higher education more affordable and accessible for students. Thank you.
Good morning, Amanda Vasco for the record. That's V like Victor, A-S-K-O, V like Victor. I serve as the Director of Government Affairs for ASUN. That's the undergraduate student government of the UNR. And regarding the funding formula, I want to echo the Chancellor's remarks today on state investment into higher education. Our student government has a very strong policy stance, and that is, more often than not, students do not support the imposition of any additional student fees. And state investment helps prevent the imposition of new student fees and has a great impact. Additionally, the budget restorations outlined in the governor's budget are crucial to our education. Several students felt like their quality of education was negatively impacted by COVID. We're ready for full COVID recovery and more continuity in our course instruction, but that's something we can't do without the help of investment. Lastly, yesterday some of you may have seen the 40-plus UNR students that we brought for our day at the legislature, and several of them feel very passionate about a budget matter that was not included in the governor's recommended budget, and that's the capital improvement request for the planning dollars for a new life sciences building on our campus. The outdated Fleischman Agricultural Building is simply no longer adequate research space for thousands of our students who are studying the life sciences. And as a political science student, I can speak to the nature of this building, just having classes in it as well. And we look forward to contributing our input on higher education matters more going forward in session. Thank you so much for your time.
Good morning, Madam Chair, members of the committee. Paul Moratkin with the Vegas Chamber. The Chamber is in support of the NG budget presentation today and believe these investments are important to workforce development and diversification efforts through our state and, of course, in Southern Nevada. This is especially true as we look in the area of healthcare and believe the investment in additional $9.2 million in the UNLV Medical School is essential to growth and faculty in our system. This investment over the long term will allow us to grow the medical school capacity from 60 to 90 to 120. Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the committee.
Good morning. Barry Cole, retired psychiatrist and also volunteer faculty for the Department of Psychiatry in Reno. I want to be able to point out something kind of positive. We are on the verge of graduating 20 new psychiatrists a year between our 3 residencies in Nevada. Up here in Reno, though, we have a slight problem. 4 out of 5 will leave. And they're going to leave because California runs ads in our state psychiatry meetings brochure saying, come to California, you'll start at $279,000 a year. It's very difficult to convince a new resident that they want to set up a bricks and mortars practice when they're already $250,000 to $400,000 in debt by the time they finish their training. So we need to look at interesting models that perhaps prioritize Nevadans getting into Nevada residencies. Currently, there's some technicalities about that. They want some support, maybe like a housing stipend. One option would be looking at those graduate teaching assignments and remembering that it's the residents who teach the medical students when they rotate through psychiatry. Can they get an enhancement that way? There's 250 members of the Nevada Psychiatric Association. We look forward to working with you, working with the 3 medical schools, and hope that you will consider the needs of mental health in Nevada and support our graduating psychiatry residents so they won't leave. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Seeing no additional comment here in Carson City, we'll go to Las Vegas. Please go ahead when you're ready.
Doug Unger, D-O-U-G, U-N-G-E-R, Nevada Faculty Alliance. Thank you, Chair Dondero Loop and members of the subcommittee for your consideration. As faculty colleagues and I look over the governor's recommended NG funding, we're relieved to see proposed restorations of most budgets to pre-pandemic levels. We're especially relieved at catch-ups for formula gaps due to pandemic enrollment drops, essential for our community colleges. Also at restored funding for our professional schools, which I like to call white-collar workforce development, since 60% or more of our professional school graduates remain in Nevada. Those of us devoted to graduate education are grateful for proposed increases in graduate assistant stipends and numbers, which, by my calculations, should get us close to parity, not quite, but close, to GA support offered by competitive programs, and should help our graduate students better to subsist as they earn their advanced degrees, which are a leading factor to how both UNLV and UNR achieved R1 Carnegie Research status. That R1 ranking contributes to attracting industry and economic development for the state. Still, I can't help looking at these NG budgets and thinking that by leaving them essentially flat or catching them up to 4 years ago after factoring for inflation, they give news to faculty that we will continue to need to do more with less, as we have been doing since the Great Recession. In sum, these are at best B- budgets overall in my gradebook. I'm concerned that our state will miss out on crucial opportunities to build and grow our colleges and universities for a future in which, increasingly, our students will need advanced skills, critical thinking, and more sophisticated knowledge to be able to prosper in an ever faster changing, more uncertain world. Thank you.
Thank you very much. All right, seeing no one else in Las Vegas, we will go to the phones. Please dial 669-900-6833. Press pound when prompted for the meeting ID 897-1400-1239. Press pound, and when prompted for participant ID, press pound. VPS, when you're ready, please.
Chair, your public line is open and working, but you have no callers at this time.
Okay, well, thank you very much. And subcommittee members, thank you for your time today. That completes our business for today. I hope you have a good rest of the day, and this meeting is adjourned. We did it.